I used to believe that love meant sacrifice. That being a good daughter, sister and family member required me to give until I had nothing left. For 28 years I lived by this creed, watching my dreams shrink smaller and smaller until they were nothing more than whispered wishes in the dark. My name is Sarah Chen, and I was the family ATM with legs. Not by choice, but by a carefully orchestrated campaign of guilt, manipulation, and emotional blackmail that began when I was 16 and got my first part-time job at the local coffee shop. What started as contributing $20 a week to help with groceries morphed into something far more sinister over the years. The Chen family dynamics were toxic from the start, though I didn't recognize it then. My parents, Linda and Robert, had immigrated from Taiwan in the early 90s with big dreams and little money. They worked themselves to exhaustion building their small restaurant, Golden Dragon, which never quite achieved the success they'd envisioned. By the time I was old enough to understand, bitterness had seeped into every corner of our household, like smoke from overcooked rice. My older brother Marcus was the golden child who could do no wrong, even when he dropped out of college twice, and spent 3 years finding himself while living rent-free in our basement. My younger sister Jenny was the baby who needed protection and support through her artistic phase that had lasted 6 years and counting. And then there was me, the middle child, the reliable one, the one who would always be there to fix whatever financial crisis had emerged this week. The pattern established itself early, and with devastating precision. When I turned 18 and started college, I commuted from home to save money. Not for myself, but because the family needed my part-time job income to keep the restaurant afloat. While my classmates lived in dorms, made lifelong friends, and experienced the freedom of young adulthood, I spent my evenings washing dishes at Golden Dragon, and my weekends doing homework in the storage room, between the industrial freezer and cases of soy sauce. I told myself this was temporary. Just until the restaurant got back on its feet. Just until Marcus figured out his direction. Just until Jenny finished high school and could contribute. But just until became a permanent state of being, and I found myself trapped in a cycle of promises that were never kept and sacrifices that were never acknowledged. During my sophomore year of college, the first major financial crisis hit. The restaurant's main freezer broke down during a particularly hot summer, spoiling thousands of dollars worth of inventory. Dad came to me with tears in his eyes, explaining how insurance wouldn't cover the full loss and they needed $8,000 immediately, or they'd have to close permanently. $8,000 might as well have been $8 million to a 19-year-old college student working part-time at a campus bookstore. But I couldn't bear the thought of my parents losing everything they'd worked for. I took out a student loan I didn't need for school expenses, telling myself I'd pay it back quickly once the restaurant recovered. The money went straight to replacing the freezer and restocking the inventory. The restaurant recovered, but my loan remained. When I brought up repayment several months later, Dad looked genuinely confused. "We're family," he said, as if that explained everything. Family helps family. You think I charged my parents interest when they needed help? This became the template for every subsequent crisis. Marcus needed money for his first business venture, a mobile app that was going to revolutionize restaurant ordering. The idea actually wasn't terrible, but Marcus had no experience with app development, no business plan, and no real understanding of the market. When I suggested he start smaller or find investors, I was accused of not believing in him and crushing his entrepreneurial spirit. The guilt tactics were surgical in their precision. Mum would mention how proud she was that Marcus was showing initiative, unlike some people who are content to just collect a paycheck. Dad would talk about how important it was for the family to support each other's dreams, especially since they'd given up so much to come to America. Jenny would chime in about how cool it would be to have a brother who was a successful tech entrepreneur, and wouldn't it be amazing if our family could finally have some success stories. I wrote the check for $20,000, telling myself this was an investment in Marcus's future, and, by extension, the family's future. When the app failed 6 months later, because Marcus had spent most of the money on expensive equipment and marketing, before finishing the actual product, there was no discussion of repayment. Instead, there was talk of lessons learned and how failure was just part of the entrepreneurial journey. By the time I graduated college with a degree in accounting, I was carrying $43,000 in debt that had nothing to do with my education. I paid for Marcus's failed business, Jenny's art supplies and community college tuition, multiple restaurant equipment repairs, and my parents' medical bills when Dad threw out his back and couldn't work for 2 months. Landing a job at Morrison & Associates, a respected accounting firm, should have been the beginning of my financial independence. Instead, it became the escalation of my family's expectations. My starting salary of $42,000 seemed enormous to people who'd been scraping by on restaurant income, and suddenly, every family gathering included subtle discussions about my good fortune and how I should remember where I came from. The requests became more frequent and more substantial. Jenny decided she wanted to transfer to a 4-year art school that cost $30,000 per year. When financial aid only covered half, I was expected to make up the difference. Mum needed dental work that insurance wouldn't cover. Dad wanted to expand the restaurant's catering business but needed startup capital. Marcus had another business idea, this time involving cryptocurrency trading, and just needed a small loan to get started. Each request came with its own emotional manipulation campaign. When I hesitated about paying for Jenny's expensive art school, I was reminded that education was the most important investment we could make, and that I'd benefited from similar support when I was younger. This was factually untrue, since I'd worked and taken loans to pay for my own education. But pointing this out made me seem petty and ungrateful. The dental work for Mum became urgent when she developed a painful infection that required immediate treatment. The restaurant expansion was framed as a family legacy project that would benefit everyone, including me, since I'd presumably inherit the business someday. Marcus's cryptocurrency venture was presented as a chance to finally pay back everything he owed me, with interest, once his investments paid off. I found myself working increasingly long hours, taking on freelance bookkeeping clients in the evenings and weekends, and picking up every overtime opportunity available. My social life disappeared entirely. Dating became impossible when I couldn't afford to go out and couldn't bring anyone home without being interrogated about their financial prospects and family background. The isolation was carefully engineered, though I didn't recognize it at the time. Whenever I made new friends or showed interest in activities outside the family sphere, there would suddenly be a crisis that required my immediate attention and financial assistance. My college roommate invited me to be a bridesmaid in her wedding, but the same week Jenny had an art emergency that required immediate funding. A co-worker asked me to join a hiking club, but that was the weekend Marcus needed help moving his latest business equipment out of storage. By my 3rd year at Morrison & Associates, I was promoted to senior associate with a substantial raise. Instead of feeling excited about my professional growth, I felt trapped. The raise meant the family's expectations would increase proportionally. Sure enough, within a week of my promotion, there were 3 separate requests for financial assistance, each more urgent than the last. Jenny had been accepted into a prestigious summer art program in Europe that would cost $15,000 but could launch her career internationally. Marcus had found the perfect investment opportunity that required a $25,000 minimum buy-in, but promised returns of 40% annually. Mum and Dad wanted to finally buy a house instead of continuing to rent the apartment above the restaurant. But they needed help with the down payment and co-signer assistance, since their credit was damaged from years of financial instability. For the first time, I tried to set some boundaries. I explained that I couldn't possibly fund all 3 requests simultaneously, and suggested they prioritize which was most important. This reasonable suggestion was met with shock and disappointment. "We're not asking you to choose between us," Mum said, her voice heavy with hurt. "We're asking you to help your family achieve their dreams. Isn't that what families do?" "But I can't afford to do all 3, I protested. "I'd have to take out loans myself." "You have a good job," Dad pointed out. "Banks will lend to you. We can't get loans because of the restaurant's credit history." The logic was circular and infuriating. They couldn't get loans because of their poor financial decisions, so I should get loans to fund their continued poor financial decisions. When I pointed this out, I was accused of being judgmental, and forgetting that they'd sacrificed everything to give me opportunities. The summer art program became the focal point of the campaign. Jenny cried every day about missing this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Mum talked constantly about how proud she'd be to have a daughter studying art in Paris. Dad mentioned repeatedly how education was the one thing they'd always prioritized, even when they couldn't afford it. Marcus's investment opportunity was presented as a sure thing that would solve everyone's financial problems permanently. He'd done his research, he assured me, and this was different from his previous failed ventures. This time he had insider information from a friend who worked at a hedge fund. This time he understood the risks and had a solid strategy. The house purchase was framed as a way to build equity instead of throwing money away on rent, and wouldn't I want my parents to have security in their old age? They'd found a perfect little place in a good neighborhood, but they needed to move quickly before someone else bought it. I found myself working until midnight every night, taking on additional freelance clients, and selling my car to rely on public transportation. The stress was affecting my health and my work performance, but every time I considered saying no to a family request, the guilt would overwhelm me. The breaking point should have come earlier, but I was too deeply entrenched in the dysfunction to recognize it. Instead, it arrived on what seemed like an ordinary Tuesday evening in March, during what appeared to be a routine phone call from Jenny. But this call was different. This time I could hear the calculation behind the tears, the rehearsed quality of her emotional manipulation. This time I noticed that she called me right after I'd posted on social media about getting a small bonus at work. This time I realized that every family emergency coincided with evidence of my financial stability. "Sarah, thank God you answered," she said, her voice thick with tears that sounded almost theatrical now that I was paying attention. "I need help. It's an emergency." My heart started racing, but not with concern this time, with a growing sense of dread and recognition. "What happened? Are you hurt?" "No, nothing like that. But listen, there's this amazing opportunity. My art professor knows someone at a gallery in New York, and they want to feature emerging artists, but I need to pay for the application fee and shipping costs for my portfolio. It's only $1,500, but the deadline is tomorrow, and I don't have the money." The familiar script unfolded exactly as I'd heard it dozens of times before. The urgent opportunity that required immediate funding. The impossible deadline that prevented careful consideration. The modest amount that seemed reasonable in isolation, but was part of a pattern of endless requests. But this time, I heard something else in the background. Laughter. Multiple voices. The sound of people coaching someone through a performance. "Jenny, where are you right now?" I asked. "What? I'm at home. Why?" I can hear other people. "It sounds like you're at a party." A pause, then a hasty explanation. "Oh, that's just the TV. I'm watching a movie." But I'd heard Marcus's distinctive laugh, and what sounded like Mum's voice saying, "Remember to mention the deadline." The realization hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't a spontaneous emergency call. This was a planned manipulation, complete with audience and coaching. "Jenny, are you with the family right now planning this call?" Another pause. Longer this time. "I don't know what you mean." "Sarah, you're being paranoid. I just need help with this opportunity." "Put Mum on the phone." "Why would I do that?" "This is between us." "Because I can hear her in the background giving you advice on what to say." The pretense crumbled. "Okay, fine, they're here. But that doesn't change anything. I still need the money for the gallery opportunity." "What gallery opportunity, Jenny? What's the name of the gallery?" Silence. Then whispered consultation with her coaches. I don't remember the exact name, but that's not important. What's important is that I need to submit my portfolio tomorrow. On a Wednesday, art galleries review portfolios in the middle of the week with 24-hour deadlines. More whispered consultation. "Look, Sarah, I don't understand why you're interrogating me like this. Either you want to help me succeed, or you don't." That's when I heard the most devastating sound of all. Marcus's voice, not quite whispered enough to be inaudible, saying, "Just tell her if she doesn't help, she's destroying your artistic career. That always works." The casual cruelty of it, the calculated nature of their manipulation, the complete disregard for my intelligence and dignity, crystallized into a moment of perfect, devastating clarity. This wasn't love. This wasn't family supporting each other. This was a systematic campaign of financial and emotional abuse that had been escalating for over a decade. But the story was far from over. What happened next would test every assumption I'd ever had about family, loyalty, and the price of personal freedom. I hung up the phone without saying another word and immediately began documenting everything. Every loan that had never been repaid. Every emergency that had coincidentally aligned with my paydays. Every family gathering where financial discussions had dominated. Every guilt trip. Every manipulation tactic. Every promise that had been broken. The numbers were staggering. Over the past 10 years, I had given my family over $200,000. $200,000 that could have paid for graduate school, a house down payment, years of financial security, or any number of personal goals I'd abandoned in service of their endless needs. But documenting the financial abuse was only the beginning. As I dug deeper into the pattern, I discovered layers of manipulation I'd been blind to. My work schedule had been carefully monitored through social media and casual conversations, ensuring they knew exactly when I received bonuses or promotions. My social life had been systematically disrupted to maintain my isolation and dependence on family approval. My romantic relationships had been sabotaged through criticism and manufactured emergencies that required my immediate attention. The most insidious discovery was that my parents had been actively discouraging my professional advancement behind my back. When my supervisor at Morrison & Associates had mentioned the possibility of transferring to their prestigious New York office, Mum had called him directly to express concern about my family obligations and suggest that such a demanding position might be too stressful for me. When I'd been nominated for a professional development program that included travel and networking opportunities, Dad had contacted the program coordinator to explain that I had elderly parents who depended on me and might not be fully committed to the program requirements. They had been sabotaging my career advancement to ensure I remained financially accessible while simultaneously benefiting from my professional success. The betrayal was breathtaking in its scope and calculation. Armed with this knowledge, I began preparing for a confrontation I knew would fundamentally alter every relationship in my life. But I also knew that some truths, once acknowledged, make it impossible to continue living a lie. The next phase of my plan involved careful financial preparation. I opened new bank accounts at a different institution, ones my family couldn't access or monitor. I changed my direct deposit to the new accounts. I gathered all loan documents, bank statements, and evidence of financial transfers. I consulted with a financial advisor about protecting myself from potential retaliation. Most importantly, I began building a support network outside my family. I reconnected with college friends I'd lost touch with due to manufactured family crises. I started seeing a therapist who specialized in family dysfunction and financial abuse. I researched resources for adult children of manipulative parents. The process of preparation took 3 months, during which I had to continue the charade of financial availability while gradually reducing my contributions. This required careful strategy. Instead of cutting off funding entirely, which would have triggered immediate suspicion and intervention, I began introducing delays and conditions. When Marcus presented his latest investment opportunity, I told him I needed to see a detailed business plan and financial projections before committing. When Jenny requested funding for art supplies, I offered to purchase them directly instead of giving her cash. When Mom mentioned needing money for household repairs, I suggested getting multiple contractor quotes and exploring financing options. These reasonable requests were met with frustration and accusations of lack of trust, but they bought me time to complete my preparations while demonstrating the family's resistance to basic financial accountability. The final trigger came not from a family request, but from an outside source that illuminated the full extent of their deception. My therapist had suggested I investigate whether my parents had been claiming me as a dependent on their tax returns, despite my financial independence. What I discovered was far worse than tax fraud. They had been using my social security number and credit information to open accounts and secure loans, always making minimum payments to avoid detection, but gradually destroying my credit rating. They had taken out a second mortgage on the house I'd helped them buy, using forged documents that included my signature as a co-signer. They had opened credit cards in my name and used them to fund family expenses, including Jenny's art supplies and Marcus's business ventures. The identity theft had been ongoing for 5 years. My credit score, which I'd been too stressed and overwhelmed to monitor carefully, had dropped from excellent to poor due to accounts I didn't know existed. The financial damage was extensive, but the emotional damage of discovering that my own parents had been systematically stealing from me was devastating. This discovery changed everything. What I'd initially seen as a boundary-setting conversation became a matter of criminal fraud and legal protection. I was no longer just dealing with manipulative family dynamics. I was dealing with felony financial crimes committed by people who claimed to love me. The confrontation, when it finally came, was nothing like I'd imagined. I had pictured a family meeting where I calmly explained my new boundaries, and they gradually came to understand my position. Instead, it became a legal and emotional battlefield that would determine not just the future of our relationships, but potentially their freedom and my financial recovery. I scheduled a family dinner for a Sunday evening, telling everyone I had important news to share about my career. They assumed I'd received another promotion or bonus and were undoubtedly planning their requests for financial assistance. Instead, I arrived with a folder of documents, a digital recorder, and a lawyer on speed dial. "I need to discuss some serious issues with all of you," I began, setting the folder on the dining room table. "Over the past few months I've been documenting our family's financial interactions, and I've discovered some very troubling patterns." The room fell silent as I opened the folder and began laying out bank statements, loan documents, and credit reports. "In the past 10 years I have given this family over $200,000. None of these loans had been repaid, despite repeated promises. But that's not the most serious issue we need to address. I pulled out the credit reports and identity theft documentation. Mum, Dad, you've been using my social security number and personal information to open accounts and secure loans without my knowledge or consent. This is identity theft, and it's a federal crime. The initial reaction was denial and outrage. How dare I accuse them of criminal behavior? How could I be so ungrateful after everything they'd done for me? Didn't I understand that family members help each other? And wasn't sharing financial resources just part of being a close family? But as I presented the evidence, denial became increasingly difficult to maintain. Marcus tried to argue that I'd given them permission to use my information for family emergencies. Jenny claimed she didn't know anything about financial fraud and tried to distance herself from her parents' actions. Mum and Dad initially maintained their innocence but gradually shifted to justification. We only did what we had to do to survive, Mum said, tears streaming down her face. The restaurant was failing, and we couldn't get credit anywhere else. We always intended to pay you back. But you never told me, I replied. You stole my identity and damaged my credit without my knowledge or consent. That's not family helping family. That's fraud. The conversation escalated rapidly. Marcus accused me of trying to destroy the family over money. Jenny cried about how I was ruining her relationship with our parents. Dad became angry and defensive, claiming that everything they'd done was for the family's benefit, and that I was being selfish and vindictive. But the most revealing moment came when I presented them with two options. They could work with me to develop a repayment plan and take steps to repair the credit damage, or I would file criminal charges and pursue civil litigation to recover my losses. The immediate response was not remorse or willingness to make amends, but calculation about which option would cost them less money and public embarrassment. The mask of loving family concern dropped completely, replaced by cold assessment of financial liability and legal consequences. Marcus was the first to suggest that I was bluffing, and wouldn't actually prosecute my own parents. Jenny wondered aloud whether I had enough evidence to make criminal charges stick. Mum and Dad huddled together, whispering about statute of limitations, and whether they could claim the identity theft was a misunderstanding. That's when I realized that my entire adult life had been built on a fundamental misunderstanding. I had believed we were a family struggling with money problems and communication issues. They saw me as a financial resource to be exploited as thoroughly as possible with minimal consequences. The revelation was simultaneously devastating and liberating. Devastating because it meant acknowledging that the people I'd loved and sacrificed for had never truly loved or respected me. Liberating because it meant I was finally free to prioritize my own well-being, without guilt or obligation. The legal process that followed was complex and emotionally draining. I did file criminal charges for identity theft and fraud, though the prosecutor ultimately offered plea deals that resulted in restitution requirements rather than jail time. The civil litigation was more successful, resulting in court orders for repayment and legal accountability. But the most important outcome wasn't financial recovery or legal vindication. It was the complete reconstruction of my identity and relationships, starting with the fundamental understanding that love and respect must be mutual to be authentic. The family's reaction to my legal action was swift and vicious. They launched a campaign to discredit me within our extended family and community, claiming I was mentally unstable, vindictive, and turning on the people who had sacrificed everything for me. Some relatives believed their version of events, and I lost several relationships I'd valued, but others had been watching our family dynamics for years and weren't surprised by my revelations. My Aunt Carol, Mum's sister, called to tell me she'd always suspected financial abuse, but hadn't known how to address it. My cousin David admitted he'd been warned by his parents never to lend money to my immediate family because they didn't repay debts. The most surprising support came from completely unexpected sources. Mrs. Zhang, our elderly neighbor who had watched me grow up, stopped by to tell me she was proud of me for standing up for myself. She'd observed the family dynamics for years, and had often worried about my situation but hadn't felt it was her place to intervene. Dr. Rodriguez, my former professor who had recommended me for my job at Morrison & Associates, reached out after hearing about the situation through professional networks. He offered to serve as a reference for any career changes I wanted to make, and assured me that what I'd done took tremendous courage and integrity. Rebuilding my life required more than just financial recovery and legal resolution. It required learning to trust my own judgment, developing healthy relationships, and creating an identity independent of my usefulness to others. The process started with small steps. I moved to a new apartment across town, one my family couldn't easily access or monitor. I changed my phone number and established strict boundaries about communication. I joined social groups and professional organizations where I could meet people who knew nothing about my family situation. Dating was particularly challenging after years of manipulation and control. I had to learn to recognize healthy relationship dynamics and trust that someone could be interested in me for reasons beyond financial benefit. My first serious relationship after the family break was with Tom, a teacher I met through a hiking club. Tom's approach to money and relationships was revolutionary to me. He paid for his own expenses, contributed fairly to shared costs, and never once suggested that my financial resources should be available to solve his problems. When he needed a car repair he couldn't afford, he researched financing options and asked friends for recommendations for affordable mechanics. The idea that someone would handle their own financial problems without involving me was both foreign and deeply attractive, but the most significant change was professional. With my credit restored and my finances stable, I was finally able to pursue the career advancement I'd been avoiding for years. I applied for the position at Morrison & Associates' New York office that had been offered years earlier. When I mentioned my interest to my supervisor, he was surprised and pleased. "We always wondered why you turned down that opportunity before," he said. "Your parents called to express concerns about your ability to handle the demands, but we thought you were perfect for the role." Learning about my parents' career sabotage was painful but also clarifying. It explained years of missed opportunities and stalled advancement that I'd attributed to my own limitations or bad timing. With that interference removed, my career began flourishing in ways I hadn't imagined possible. The New York position was everything I'd hoped for, and more. The work was challenging and engaging, the salary was substantially higher, and the professional development opportunities were extensive. For the first time in my adult life, I was living up to my potential instead of deliberately limiting myself to maintain family stability. But success brought its own challenges. As news of my promotion and relocation spread through our community, family members and their supporters began reaching out, with attempts at reconciliation that felt more like renewed manipulation attempts. Marcus called to congratulate me on my success, and mentioned that he'd learned from his mistakes, and had a new business idea that was much more realistic and well-planned. Jenny sent a long email about how proud she was of my achievements, and how she'd always believed in me, carefully avoiding any mention of the years of financial exploitation. Mum and Dad's approach was more subtle, but equally calculated. They sent a card congratulating me on my new job, signed, "With love and pride from your parents," as if the legal proceedings and identity theft had never happened. They began attending community events where they knew I'd be mentioned, speaking proudly about their successful daughter who was making such a name for herself in New York. The most insidious attempts came through mutual friends and extended family members who had been recruited to serve as intermediaries. Aunt Linda called to suggest that enough time had passed for healing, and that family relationships were more important than past disagreements. Cousin Mark mentioned that my parents were getting older and it would be tragic if I missed the opportunity to reconcile before it was too late. Each overture was carefully designed to exploit my lingering guilt and desire for family connection, while avoiding any acknowledgement of wrongdoing or commitment to change behavior. They wanted reconciliation on their terms, which meant resuming the financial support, without the inconvenience of legal accountability. But the most revealing attempt came during my first Christmas in New York. I received a package from home containing a photo album of family memories, including pictures from my childhood, graduations, and family celebrations. Attached was a note from Mum. "We miss you and love you. Family is forever. We hope you'll come home for the holidays, so we can be together again." The subtext was clear. "Look at all the happy memories we shared, remember how much we love each other, and come back so things can return to normal." But looking at those photos with clear eyes, I could see things I'd missed before. In picture after picture, I was the one working in the background while others celebrated. I was the one missing from group photos because I was taking them. I was the one whose achievements were mentioned briefly before conversation turned to someone else's needs. The photo album, intended to evoke nostalgia and guilt, instead reinforced my decision to prioritize my own well-being. Those memories were real, but they represented a dynamic I was no longer willing to accept. Instead of going home for Christmas, I spent the holiday with Tom's family, experiencing for the first time what healthy family dynamics look like. His parents asked about my work and interests without calculating how they could benefit from my success. His siblings included me in conversations and activities without any agenda beyond genuine connection. When someone needed help, it was discussed openly and fairly, with consideration for everyone's circumstances and capabilities. The contrast was stark and educational. I realized that everything I'd thought was normal family behavior was actually dysfunction I'd been conditioned to accept. The guilt, manipulation, and financial exploitation weren't universal family experiences. They were specific patterns of abuse that many families actively avoid. The following months brought continued attempts at reconciliation from various family members, each more sophisticated than the last. Jenny enrolled in business classes and sent me detailed plans for an art-based business she wanted to start, carefully emphasizing how she'd learned the importance of financial responsibility and wouldn't need any money from me. Marcus got a job at a tech company and sent regular updates about his professional progress, subtly indicating that he was finally stable enough to begin repaying old debts. Mum and Dad's approach was the most manipulative. They began attending financial counseling sessions and sent me certificates and progress reports, demonstrating their commitment to better money management. They had the restaurant's books professionally audited and sent me copies showing improved profitability. They even started making small payments toward the restitution they owed, always accompanied by notes about how much they missed me and hoped we could rebuild our relationship. Each gesture was designed to demonstrate change, while avoiding the deeper accountability that real change would require. They wanted to convince me they'd reformed enough to deserve renewed trust and support, but without acknowledging the full extent of their manipulation, or accepting responsibility for the years of damage they'd caused. The most difficult moment came when Dad had another heart attack. This one, more serious than the previous one. Mum called to inform me, and for the first time in over a year, I felt the old guilt and obligation rising in my chest. Family crises had always been my signal to drop everything and rush to help, regardless of previous conflicts or unresolved issues. But this time, I had support systems in place to help me think clearly. My therapist helped me distinguish between compassion and codependency. Tom reminded me that caring about someone's well-being didn't require sacrificing my own boundaries. My new friends in New York who'd watched me build a healthier life encouraged me to trust my judgment about what level of involvement felt appropriate. I sent flowers to the hospital and a card expressing my hope for Dad's recovery, but I didn't rush home to take charge of the situation. I didn't offer to pay medical bills or arrange for additional care. I didn't allow the crisis to override the boundaries I'd established or the lessons I'd learned about healthy relationships. The response to my measured reaction was swift and revealing. Within days, I received calls from multiple family members expressing shock and disappointment at my coldness during a family emergency. How could I care so little about my father's health? How could I be so selfish when the family needed support? Didn't I realize that holding grudges was unhealthy, and that life was too short for such bitter divisions? But buried in the criticism were demands that revealed the real motivation behind the outrage. Why wasn't I helping coordinate Dad's care? Why wasn't I researching the best cardiac specialists and arranging consultations? Why wasn't I setting up a fund to cover expenses that insurance wouldn't handle? They didn't just want emotional support during a difficult time. They wanted me to resume my role as the family's financial and practical problem solver. The medical crisis was being leveraged as an opportunity to re-establish the old dynamic under the cover of compassionate family concern. Dad recovered from the heart attack, and life gradually returned to normal for everyone except me. I had passed a crucial test of my commitment to healthy boundaries, but the experience had shown me how persistent and creative the manipulation attempts would continue to be. Over the following year, the family tried different approaches to re-establish contact and influence. They recruited mutual friends to serve as intermediaries, sharing carefully curated updates about family news and expressing concern about the ongoing estrangement. They made donations to charities they knew I supported, always ensuring the donations were made in ways that would be reported back to me. Marcus got engaged and sent me a wedding invitation with a personal note about how much it would mean to have his sister there for such an important milestone. Jenny had her first art show and sent me a catalogue with an inscription thanking me for all the support I'd given her over the years. Mom started volunteering at a financial literacy non-profit, making sure her involvement was mentioned in community newsletters that she knew I received. Each gesture was designed to demonstrate positive change, while creating opportunities for renewed contact. They wanted to show that they'd grown and changed, without acknowledging the specific harms they'd caused, or accepting accountability for past behavior. The most sophisticated attempt came on my 30th birthday. Instead of a card or gift, I received a letter from a law firm informing me that my parents had established a trust fund in my name, funded with proceeds from the sale of some restaurant equipment. The trust was set up to provide me with monthly payments for the next 10 years, totaling approximately $50,000. Attached to the legal documents was a personal note from Dad. We know we made mistakes and hurt you. We can't undo the past, but we want to try to make things right. This trust is our way of showing that we recognize our debts to you and want to honor our obligations. We hope this gesture demonstrates our commitment to rebuilding our relationship on a foundation of mutual respect and accountability. The gesture was impressive in its apparent generosity and legal sophistication, but my experience with family manipulation had taught me to look for hidden motives and conditions. A careful review of the trust documents revealed several concerning provisions. The monthly payments were contingent on maintaining positive family relationships, as determined by a family council consisting of my parents and siblings. The trust could be revoked at any time if I engaged in hostile or vindictive behavior toward family members. Most significantly, accepting any payment from the trust would constitute legal acknowledgement that all previous family financial disputes had been resolved satisfactorily. The trust wasn't a genuine attempt at restitution. It was a sophisticated trap designed to re-establish financial dependence and legal control. By accepting the money, I would be signing away my right to pursue additional legal remedies and agreeing to submit to family judgment about my behavior and attitudes. I declined the trust and returned the documents with a brief note explaining that genuine restitution doesn't come with conditions or strings attached. The response was immediate and illuminating. Within days, I received angry calls from Marcus and Jenny accusing me of being impossible to please and determined to hold grudges forever. How could I reject such a generous gesture? What more did I want from them? The answer was simple but apparently incomprehensible to them. I wanted authentic relationships based on mutual respect, not financial arrangements designed to maintain control and avoid accountability. But the most telling response came from Mum, who called to express her disappointment in my decision. "We were trying to show you that we've changed," she said. "But you're determined to punish us forever." But the most telling response came from Mum, who called to express her disappointment in my decision. "We were trying to show you that we've changed," she said. "But you're determined to punish us forever. You're destroying this family with your selfishness." The irony was breathtaking. After years of exploiting my generosity and manipulating my emotions, they were now positioning themselves as victims of my unreasonable expectations. The trust fund rejection had revealed their true motivations. They wanted reconciliation without accountability, forgiveness without acknowledgement of wrongdoing, and renewed access to my resources without genuine change in their behavior. This pattern would continue for the next 2 years, with escalating sophistication and desperation. Each failed attempt at reconciliation was followed by a period of angry accusations, then strategic silence, then a new approach designed to exploit different emotional vulnerabilities. The most disturbing escalation came when they began involving my professional life in their manipulation campaigns. Someone, likely Marcus given his tech background, had been monitoring my professional activities through social media and company websites. When I was featured in a trade publication article about rising stars in accounting, the restaurant suddenly started receiving calls from local media, wanting to do a story about the successful daughter of hard-working immigrant restaurateurs. Mum and Dad eagerly participated in these interviews, presenting themselves as proud parents who had always supported my ambitions and sacrificed to ensure my success. They spoke movingly about the challenges of immigrant families and the importance of education and hard work. They carefully omitted any mention of the financial exploitation, identity theft, or legal proceedings that had characterized our actual relationship. The media coverage was overwhelmingly positive, portraying my parents as inspiring examples of the American dream and positioning me as an ungrateful daughter who had abandoned her loving family after achieving success. Community members who didn't know the full story began reaching out to express their disappointment in my behavior and encourage me to reconcile with such devoted parents. The professional implications were potentially serious. Morrison and Associates valued community engagement and positive public relations. Having my family situation become a source of negative publicity could impact my career advancement and professional reputation. My supervisor called to ask about the articles and whether there were family issues I needed to discuss, or that might affect my work. I found myself in the impossible position of either allowing my family's false narrative to go unchallenged, or publicly defending myself against people who presented themselves as loving parents devastated by their daughter's inexplicable coldness. Either choice would damage my professional reputation and personal well-being. The solution came from an unexpected source. Dr. Martinez, a psychologist who specialized in family trauma and had been treating several clients with similar experiences, reached out after reading one of the media articles. She was researching patterns of financial abuse in immigrant families and wondered if I would be willing to participate in a study that might help other adult children in similar situations. Working with Dr. Martinez gave me access to resources and perspectives I hadn't known existed. I learned that my experience was far from unique, that financial exploitation of successful adult children was a documented pattern in families with certain psychological dynamics, and that the manipulation tactics my family employed followed predictable scripts used by abusive individuals across different cultures and contexts. More importantly, I learned effective strategies for protecting myself from ongoing manipulation attempts while maintaining my professional reputation and personal integrity. Dr. Martinez helped me craft a public statement that acknowledged my parents' immigrant experience and the challenges they'd faced, while clearly establishing my boundaries and explaining my position, without engaging in detailed accusations or public conflict. The statement, published as a letter to the editor in the local newspaper, was carefully worded to express respect for my parents' struggles, while making clear that adult children have the right to establish healthy boundaries with family members, regardless of past sacrifices or cultural expectations. I emphasized that love and respect must be mutual, and that financial support should be freely given rather than coerced through guilt and manipulation. The response was mixed, but ultimately positive. Some community members continued to criticize my decision, but others began sharing their own stories of family financial abuse and expressing support for my courage in speaking out. Most importantly, the professional concerns were addressed without damaging my career prospects or community standing. But the family's reaction to my public statement was swift and vicious. Within days, I began receiving threatening messages from extended family members, accusing me of bringing shame on the entire community and destroying my parents' reputation for personal revenge. Marcus created fake social media accounts to spread rumors about my mental health and financial motivations. Jenny started a whisper campaign suggesting that my success had gone to my head, and I'd become cruel and materialistic. The most concerning escalation came when someone began calling my employer with anonymous tips about my unstable family situation, and suggestions that I might not be trustworthy with client finances, given my willingness to steal from my own parents. The calls were obviously orchestrated by someone with knowledge of my work schedule and client relationships, most likely Marcus or one of his tech-savvy friends. Morrison and Associates took the call seriously enough to conduct a formal review of my work and client relationships. While the investigation ultimately cleared me of any wrongdoing, and actually resulted in commendations for my professional integrity, the experience was deeply stressful and potentially damaging to my career advancement. That's when I made the decision that would finally end the cycle of manipulation and retaliation. I hired a private investigator to document the harassment campaign and gathered evidence for a restraining order against my immediate family members. The decision felt extreme, but years of escalating manipulation and the direct threats to my professional livelihood had made clear that boundary setting alone wouldn't be sufficient to protect myself. The private investigator's findings were more extensive than I'd expected. The harassment campaign involved not just my immediate family, but a network of extended relatives and family friends who had been recruited to participate in efforts to damage my reputation and professional standing. The fake social media accounts were part of a coordinated strategy to spread damaging information about me across multiple platforms and professional networks. Most disturbing was evidence that they had been researching my personal life in New York, including my relationship with Tom, my friendships, and my professional activities. Someone had been taking photos of my apartment building and workplace, presumably to gather information for future manipulation or intimidation efforts. The restraining order application required detailed documentation of the harassment pattern and its impact on my life and career. Putting together the evidence forced me to confront the full scope of what my family had been willing to do to maintain control over me. They had moved far beyond financial manipulation into stalking, reputation destruction, and professional sabotage. The legal proceedings were complex and emotionally exhausting, but ultimately successful. The court granted a comprehensive restraining order that prohibited all forms of contact, including through third parties, and specifically addressed the harassment campaign and professional interference. Violating the order would result in immediate arrest and criminal charges. The family's response to the restraining order was predictably dramatic. They organized a community meeting to discuss my persecution of them, and gathered signatures on a petition asking Morrison and Associates to reconsider my employment. They contacted local media to share their perspective on the legal proceedings, portraying themselves as heartbroken parents being criminally prosecuted by their successful but vindictive daughter. But the community response was more nuanced than they'd anticipated. Many people had been watching the escalating conflict and were troubled by the level of harassment and retaliation I'd been experiencing. Dr. Martinez's research had also raised awareness about family financial abuse, and several other community members had begun sharing their own experiences with similar dynamics. The petition against my employment gathered fewer signatures than expected, and several prominent community leaders publicly supported my right to establish boundaries and protect myself from harassment. The local media coverage became more balanced as reporters investigated both sides of the story and discovered evidence of the manipulation campaign. Most importantly, the restraining order had the desired effect of stopping the direct harassment and professional interference. Without the constant stress of managing manipulation attempts and protecting my reputation, I was finally able to focus entirely on building the life I wanted, rather than defending myself from the life I was trying to escape. The silence that followed was initially unsettling. After years of constant family drama and crisis management, the absence of manipulation attempts felt almost suspicious. I found myself waiting for the next shoe to drop, the next crisis that would test my resolve, the next creative attempt to re-establish contact and control. But as months passed without incident, I began to believe that the legal intervention had finally convinced my family that I was serious about my boundaries, and willing to enforce them, regardless of the personal cost. The restraining order had communicated more clearly than any conversation could, that I was no longer available for exploitation, and would protect myself by any means necessary. The psychological adjustment to genuine freedom took longer than I'd expected. Years of hypervigilance and crisis management had left me with anxiety and trust issues that required ongoing therapeutic work. Learning to relax and trust that my success and happiness wouldn't be undermined by family sabotage was a gradual process. But the growth that emerged from that healing process was transformative. Without the constant drain of family financial obligations and emotional manipulation, I had energy and resources to invest in my own development and relationships. My career flourished, as I was able to accept challenging assignments and leadership opportunities that would have been impossible when I was constantly managing family crises. My relationship with Tom deepened, as I learned to trust that someone could love me without expecting financial support, or accepting abuse as the price of family connection. We moved in together after dating for 2 years, and for the first time in my adult life, I experienced what it felt like to be in a partnership where both people contributed equally and respected each other's autonomy. The professional recognition that followed was gratifying but also bittersweet. When I was promoted to partner at Morrison & Associates at age 32, making me the youngest partner in the firm's history, I felt proud of my accomplishments but also grieved for the years of potential that had been lost to family exploitation. The promotion came with a substantial salary increase and profit-sharing benefits that would have been unimaginable during my years of financial servitude. For the first time, I was able to purchase a home, establish serious retirement savings, and plan for a future that belonged entirely to me. But success also brought renewed attention from my family, despite the restraining order. They couldn't contact me directly, but they found ways to monitor my achievements through public records, professional publications, and social media. The promotion was covered in industry publications, and I later learned that copies of the articles had been circulating among family members and extended relatives. The restraining order prevented direct contact, but it couldn't stop them from talking about me within their own circles, or expressing their views about my success to mutual acquaintances. Through friends and professional colleagues, I occasionally heard reports of their reactions to my achievements. Marcus had apparently told people that my success proved he'd been right about the importance of family support, and that I was ungrateful for abandoning the people who had helped me achieve my goals. Jenny claimed that she'd always believed in my potential and was proud of my accomplishments, conveniently omitting the years of financial exploitation and manipulation. Mum and Dad spoke sadly about their estranged daughter, who had chosen career success over family relationships, positioning themselves as tragic figures whose sacrifices had been repaid with abandonment. Each version of the story carefully edited out the financial abuse, identity theft, harassment campaign, and legal proceedings that had actually characterized our relationship. They had created an alternative narrative, where they were loving, supportive parents, whose successful daughter had inexplicably turned against them, and they seemed to genuinely believe this revised history. The most disturbing reports came from family friends who described conversations where my parents spoke about me, with a mixture of pride and resentment, that suggested they still viewed my success as somehow belonging to them. They took credit for my achievements while simultaneously portraying themselves as victims of my ingratitude. A psychological contradiction that revealed the depth of their dysfunction. But perhaps the most telling indicator of their continued mindset came through Drive, Martinez's research. As part of her study on family financial abuse, she had interviewed several families about their experiences and perspectives. My parents had agreed to participate, apparently viewing it as an opportunity to share their side of the story and gain sympathy for their situation. Their interview responses, which Dr. Martinez shared with me as part of the research findings, were illuminating and disturbing. They acknowledged that they had borrowed money from me over the years, but characterized it as normal family financial support that any good daughter would provide. They admitted to using my credit information, but claimed it was for family emergencies, and that they had always intended to pay me back. Most revealing was their complete inability to acknowledge the impact their actions had on my life and well-being. When asked about my perspective on the financial arrangements, they dismissed my concerns as ingratitude and selfishness. They couldn't conceive that their financial exploitation might have been harmful, or that I had legitimate reasons for establishing boundaries. The interview transcripts confirmed what I had gradually come to understand. My family was not capable of the self-reflection and accountability that genuine reconciliation would require. They had constructed a reality where their needs justified any behavior, and where my resistance to exploitation was evidence of character defects rather than healthy boundary setting. This realization was simultaneously liberating and grief-inducing. Liberating because it confirmed that my decision to maintain distance was necessary and appropriate. Grief-inducing because it meant accepting that the loving, supportive family relationships I had always hoped for were simply not possible with these particular people. The grieving process for family relationships is complex and often misunderstood. Unlike other forms of loss, it involves mourning people who are still alive but emotionally unavailable, relationships that existed but were fundamentally unhealthy, and dreams that were based on potential rather than reality. Dr. Martinez helped me understand that grieving the family I'd wanted, while protecting myself from the family I actually had, was not a contradiction, but a necessary part of healing. I could acknowledge the love I'd felt for my parents and siblings, while also recognizing that love alone wasn't sufficient to maintain relationships that were damaging to my well-being. The third year after establishing no contact brought unexpected challenges and growth opportunities. Tom proposed during a hiking trip in the mountains, choosing a location that had become special to us through our shared adventures, rather than allowing family obligations to dictate the timing or circumstances. Planning our wedding without family involvement was initially disorienting but ultimately liberating. We designed a celebration that reflected our values and preferences, rather than managing family dynamics or expectations. The guest list included the friends and colleagues who had supported my journey toward independence and healing. The ceremony was intimate and joyful, focused on our commitment to each other rather than complicated by family politics or manipulation. The absence of my biological family was noticeable, but not devastating. Tom's family had embraced me warmly, and I had developed close relationships with friends who functioned as chosen family. The wedding was a celebration of the life I had built rather than a compromise between conflicting loyalties and obligations. But the most meaningful moment came during the reception, when my mentor from Morrison & Associates stood to give a toast about resilience, courage, and the importance of surrounding yourself with people who celebrate your success, rather than exploiting it. Her words acknowledged my journey without dwelling on the painful details, honoring both my strength and my vulnerability, in ways my biological family had never been able to do. The honeymoon was my first real vacation in over a decade. A 2-week trip to New Zealand that would have been impossible during my years of financial obligation to my family. The freedom to spend money on experiences and adventures for pure enjoyment, without calculating whether the funds might be needed for someone else's crisis, was intoxicating and emotional. But the most significant development came 6 months after the wedding, when I received an unexpected phone call from my cousin Lisa, whom I hadn't spoken to since the restraining order proceedings. She had moved across the country for her own career, and had gradually distanced herself from the family's drama and manipulation. "I wanted you to know that I think you did the right thing," she said without preamble. "I've been watching this situation for years, and I've seen how they treated you. I'm proud of you for getting out and building a good life." Lisa's call opened a door to reconnecting with extended family members who had been uncomfortable with my parents' behavior, but hadn't known how to address it without causing family conflict. Several cousins, aunts, and uncles had quietly supported my decision, while maintaining relationships with my immediate family for their own reasons. These reconnections were cautious and limited, but they provided a sense of family connection that wasn't based on exploitation or manipulation. Lisa and I began having regular video calls, sharing updates about our careers and relationships, without any financial undertones or hidden agendas. Her friendship reminded me that healthy family relationships were possible. I just hadn't been able to access them, while maintaining my toxic dynamic with my parents and siblings. The fourth year brought professional opportunities that would have been impossible during my financially constrained years. Morrison & Associates offered me the chance to open and manage their new West Coast office, a position that came with significant autonomy, equity participation, and the opportunity to build something from the ground up. The decision to accept the promotion required moving to San Francisco, even further from my biological family but closer to the life I wanted to build. Tom was enthusiastic about the adventure, and his teaching credentials were transferable to California schools. We sold our New York apartment and purchased a house in the Bay Area, with a view of the ocean and hiking trails, accessible from our backyard. The geographical distance provided an additional layer of protection from family manipulation attempts, but more importantly, it symbolized my complete independence from the life I'd been expected to live. I was no longer the daughter who stayed close to home to provide financial support and crisis management. I was a successful professional, building a career and life entirely of my own choosing. The new office opening was covered in business publications, including several articles that mentioned my background and professional achievements. I learned through mutual acquaintances that these articles had been read by my family members, who had mixed reactions to my continued success and geographic distance. Marcus had apparently expressed frustration that I was wasting my success by moving so far away from family, as if my achievements were somehow diminished by my unwillingness to share them with people who had exploited me. Jenny had made comments about how sad it was that success had changed me so much that I no longer valued family relationships. But the most telling response came from my parents, who had begun telling people that they were proud of my success, but worried about my isolation from family support systems. They positioned my independence as a form of loneliness rather than strength, suggesting that my achievements were somehow hollow without family involvement. This narrative revealed their fundamental inability to conceive of success that wasn't connected to their approval or participation. They couldn't imagine that I might be happier and more fulfilled without their presence in my life, because their own sense of identity was so tied to their role in my achievements. The fifth year brought news that tested my resolve and emotional growth in unexpected ways. Through Lisa, I learned that Dad had been diagnosed with early-stage Alzheimer's disease, and that the family was struggling to manage his care while keeping the restaurant operating. The old me would have immediately stepped in to coordinate care, research treatment options, and provide financial support for whatever medical interventions might be helpful. The impulse to help was still strong, activated by years of conditioning and genuine concern for Dad's well-being despite our complicated history. But 5 years of therapy, healthy relationships and independence had given me the tools to distinguish between compassion and compulsion. I could feel sorry for Dad's diagnosis and the family's challenges, without automatically assuming responsibility for solving their problems. I sent a card expressing my sympathy and best wishes for his treatment, but I didn't offer financial assistance or volunteer to coordinate care. The restraining order was still in effect, but more importantly, I had learned that helping people who had consistently exploited my generosity wasn't actually helping anyone in the long run. The family's response to my limited involvement was predictably critical. Through various intermediaries, I heard that I was being described as heartless and vindictive for abandoning my father during a health crisis. How could I claim to love him while refusing to help during his time of greatest need? But I also heard, through Lisa and other extended family members, that my absence had forced my siblings to step up and take responsibility in ways they never had before. Marcus had taken a leave of absence from his job to help manage Dad's care. Jenny had moved back home temporarily to assist with daily activities. Christopher had researched care facilities and support services. For the first time in their adult lives, they were experiencing what it felt like to sacrifice their own goals and resources for family needs. The irony wasn't lost on me that they were now providing the kind of support they had always expected me to give without question. The most significant development came when they realized that managing a family crisis without my financial and practical support required them to make difficult decisions about Dad's care, based on their actual resources rather than my subsidies. They had to choose between expensive private care and more affordable community options. They had to coordinate schedules and share responsibilities instead of expecting one person to handle everything. According to Lisa, the experience had been eye-opening for Marcus in particular. He had never realized how much time and money I had devoted to family crisis management over the years. Suddenly responsible for handling similar challenges himself, he gained appreciation for the sacrifices I had made and the burden I had carried. Jenny's reaction was more complex. She had moved home to help with Dad's care, but was struggling with the loss of independence and creative time that caregiving required. For the first time, she was experiencing the conflict between personal goals and family obligations that had defined my adult life. Christopher had surprised everyone by proving to be the most capable and devoted caregiver among the siblings. His gentle nature and patience made him naturally suited to helping Dad with daily activities and medical appointments. But he was also frustrated by Marcus and Jenny's resistance to making the financial sacrifices that caregiving required. The family dynamics were shifting in ways that might have been impossible if I had remained available as their automatic problem solver. Without me to absorb the costs and responsibilities of crisis management, they were being forced to develop the skills and commitments that healthy families require. But the most unexpected development came 8 months after Dad's diagnosis, when I received a letter forwarded through Lisa from Christopher. He had written to apologize for years of allowing me to carry burdens that should have been shared among all the siblings, and to thank me for the sacrifices I had made, that he was only now beginning to understand. I never realized how much you gave up for our family until I had to start giving up things myself, he wrote. I always thought you were just naturally better at handling problems and managing money, but now I understand that you are making choices and sacrifices that I never appreciated. I'm sorry for taking advantage of your generosity, and for not standing up for you when the others were treating you unfairly. The letter was thoughtful and specific, acknowledging particular incidents where he could have supported me, but chose to remain silent to avoid conflict. He didn't ask for reconciliation or forgiveness, but simply wanted me to know that he understood the situation differently now, and regretted his role in enabling the family's exploitation of my resources. Christopher's letter was the first genuine acknowledgement of wrongdoing and accountability I had ever received from any family member. It didn't change my decision to maintain distance, but it provided a sense of validation and closure that I hadn't realized I needed. More importantly, it suggested that some people were capable of growth and self-reflection, given sufficient motivation and real-world consequences. Christopher's caregiver role had forced him to experience the responsibilities and sacrifices that I had been managing alone for years, and that experience had generated genuine empathy and understanding. I wrote back to thank him for his honesty and courage in acknowledging the family dynamics that others continue to deny or minimize. I told him that while I wasn't ready to resume family relationships, I respected his growth and appreciated his willingness to take responsibility for his past behavior. The correspondence with Christopher remained limited and careful, but it opened a window into the family's ongoing struggles and changes. Dad's condition was deteriorating slowly, requiring increasing levels of care and supervision. The restaurant was struggling financially as Dad's involvement decreased, and the family's attention was divided between business management and caregiving. Marcus had reluctantly accepted that his tech career would need to be put on hold indefinitely to help with family responsibilities. Jenny had given up her artistic pursuits temporarily to focus on practical caregiving tasks. Both were discovering that family obligations required sacrifices they had never been willing to make, when those sacrifices could be shifted to me. The financial strain was significant without my contributions. They had been forced to take out loans to cover Dad's medical expenses and hire part-time help for his care. The restaurant's declining profits were insufficient to support both business operations and family healthcare costs. For the first time in their adult lives, they were experiencing the financial stress and difficult choices that most families face when dealing with serious illness and aging parents. They couldn't simply assume that someone else would absorb the costs and manage the logistics while they continued their normal lives. Christopher's update suggested that the experience was generating some insights about family responsibility and mutual support, though the lessons were being learned slowly and with considerable resistance from Marcus and Jenny. They still complained about the unfairness of having their lives disrupted by family obligations, apparently without recognizing the irony of their complaints. But perhaps the most significant change was that they had stopped talking about me as the solution to their problems. According to Christopher, my name rarely came up in family discussions about Dad's care or the restaurant's challenges. They had gradually accepted that they would need to manage their difficulties with their own resources and capabilities. This shift represented a fundamental change in family dynamics. For the first time in decades, they were functioning as an independent unit, rather than depending on external subsidies and support. The experience was difficult and stressful, but it was also authentic in ways their previous dynamics had never been. The 6th year brought news that would test everything I had learned about boundaries, forgiveness, and the complexity of family relationships. Christopher called to inform me that Dad had taken a turn for the worse and was likely in his final months. The Alzheimer's had progressed to the point where he required full-time care, and the family was facing decisions about end-of-life care and arrangements. "I'm not asking you to come home or get involved," Christopher said carefully. "I just thought you should know what's happening in case you want to. I don't know, have closure or say goodbye or something. I understand if you don't want to, but I felt like you should have the choice." The call forced me to confront questions I had been avoiding about death, forgiveness, and the difference between accountability and compassion. Did maintaining healthy boundaries require cutting myself off from saying goodbye to someone who had been a significant figure in my life, despite our complicated relationship? Could I find a way to honor the love I had felt for my father, while also protecting myself from renewed manipulation attempts? Dr. Martinez helped me work through the emotional complexity of the situation. She emphasized that whatever decision I made should be based on my own needs and values, rather than external expectations or guilt. If saying goodbye would provide closure and peace, that was valid. If protecting my boundaries and avoiding potential manipulation was more important, that was equally valid. After weeks of consideration, I decided to write Dad a letter that Christopher could read to him. The letter acknowledged the positive memories from my childhood, expressed forgiveness for past hurts, and wished him peace and comfort in his final months. It allowed me to say goodbye without exposing myself to renewed family manipulation, or compromising the boundaries I had worked so hard to establish. Dad passed away peacefully 3 months later, with Christopher, Marcus, and Jenny at his bedside. I felt a complex mixture of grief, relief, and sadness that was impossible to categorize or explain to people who hadn't experienced similar family dynamics. I grieved the father I had loved, and the relationship we might have had under different circumstances, while also feeling relief that a chapter of my life was finally closed. I didn't attend the funeral, a decision that generated criticism from some extended family members and community acquaintances who didn't understand the full history of our relationship. But Tom, my therapist, and my chosen family understood and supported my choice to honor my father's memory in private, rather than subjecting myself to potential manipulation during a vulnerable time. Christopher sent me a photo from the service and a brief note, letting me know that the letter I had written was read aloud during the ceremony. He said it provided comfort to Dad during his final days, and it helped the family understand that love and boundaries could coexist, even in difficult circumstances. The months following Dad's death brought changes in family dynamics that I observed from a distance, through Christopher's occasional updates. Without Dad as a unifying figure and source of shared obligations, the siblings began to drift apart and pursue their individual priorities more independently. Marcus returned to his tech career with a new appreciation for the stability and independence that steady employment provided. His experience as a family caregiver had taught him the value of financial security and the costs of depending too heavily on others for support. Jenny had used her caregiving experience to launch a non-profit organization providing art therapy services to families dealing with dementia and other chronic illnesses. The work combined her artistic talents with practical service, in ways that were more fulfilling and sustainable than her previous pursuit of commercial art success. Christopher had decided to pursue a career in social work, inspired by his caregiving experience and his observations of family dysfunction. He was enrolled in a graduate program and working part-time at a non-profit that provided support services to families dealing with elder care challenges. The restaurant was sold to a local family who wanted to maintain its community presence and traditional menu. The proceeds provided modest inheritances for each sibling, though the amount was much smaller than it would have been if Dad had been able to plan more effectively for the business transition. Most significantly, the inheritance distribution process had required the siblings to work together and communicate openly about finances, responsibilities, and future plans for the first time in their adult lives. The experience had been challenging, but had also generated some mutual respect and understanding that had been absent from their previous relationships. Christopher's update suggested that Marcus and Jenny had gained some appreciation for the financial and emotional labor that family relationships require, though they still struggled with taking full responsibility for their past exploitation of my generosity. They acknowledged that I had been treated unfairly but continued to frame the situation as a family tragedy, rather than a pattern of abuse that had required legal intervention to stop. The 7th year brought professional recognition that exceeded my wildest dreams from my early career. The West Coast office I had established was named Regional Office of the Year by our industry association, and I was invited to speak at conferences about innovative practice management and professional development. But the most meaningful recognition came from an unexpected source. Dr. Martinez's research on family financial abuse had been published in a major psychology journal, with my case study serving as a primary example of successful recovery and boundary setting. The publication led to invitations to speak at conferences about family trauma and financial exploitation. Sharing my story in professional and therapeutic settings was initially intimidating, but ultimately empowering. I discovered that my experience, while painful, had given me insights and perspectives that could help other people recognize and escape similar situations. The speaking engagements allowed me to transform my personal struggles into resources for others facing comparable challenges. The most rewarding speaking engagement was at a conference for adult children of narcissistic and emotionally abusive parents. The audience was filled with people who understood the complexity of loving family members while protecting yourself from their harmful behavior. Their questions and comments validated my experiences and reinforced my conviction that healthy boundaries are essential for personal well-being. But perhaps the most unexpected outcome of sharing my story publicly was reconnecting with former colleagues and acquaintances who revealed they had been watching my situation with concern for years, but hadn't known how to help. Several people mentioned that they had suspected financial exploitation, but had felt uncomfortable addressing such a sensitive family matter. These conversations reinforced how isolating family financial abuse can be, and how important it is for communities to recognize the signs and provide support for people trying to escape exploitative relationships. The secrecy and shame that surrounds family dysfunction allows it to continue unchallenged, while public awareness and support can provide lifelines for people seeking to establish healthier boundaries. The 8th year brought news that would challenge my assumptions about change, accountability, and the possibility of authentic reconciliation. Christopher called to tell me that Marcus had been attending therapy to address his own patterns of manipulation and financial irresponsibility. He had acknowledged the role he played in the family's exploitation of my resources, and was working to develop healthier relationships with money and family obligations. "I don't think he's ready to reach out to you directly," Christopher said. "And I'm not suggesting you should trust him or anything like that. But I thought you should know that he's actually doing some real work on himself, not just trying to manipulate his way back into your good graces." The news was surprising because Marcus had always been the most resistant to acknowledging wrongdoing or accepting responsibility for his behavior. His willingness to enter therapy and examine his own patterns suggested a level of self-reflection I hadn't thought he was capable of achieving. But I also recognized that change, even genuine change, doesn't automatically restore trust or relationships that have been severely damaged. Marcus's personal growth was positive for him and potentially beneficial for his future relationships, but it didn't erase the years of exploitation or obligate me to resume contact. Dr. Martinez helped me process the complex emotions that Marcus's apparent growth generated. I felt happy that he was addressing his issues and developing healthier patterns, but also cautious about the possibility that this was another sophisticated manipulation attempt. Most importantly, I recognized that his personal development journey was separate from my own healing and boundary-setting process. The key insight was that forgiveness and reconciliation are different processes with different requirements. I could forgive Marcus for past hurts without necessarily trusting him with renewed access to my life and resources. His therapy work was between him and his therapist. My continued boundaries were between me and my need for safety and well-being. This distinction became important when Christopher mentioned that Marcus had expressed interest in apologizing to me directly, not to seek reconciliation, but to take responsibility for his behavior and acknowledge the harm he had caused. The gesture sounded genuine, but I wasn't ready to receive it, and didn't feel obligated to provide him with an opportunity for absolution. "I'm glad he's working on himself," I told Christopher, "but I'm not ready for direct contact, and I may never be. His healing process is his responsibility, just like mine is mine. We don't owe each other anything beyond basic human respect at this point." Christopher understood and didn't pressure me to consider reconciliation or direct communication. His own growth had included learning to respect other people's boundaries without taking them personally or viewing them as rejections. The family's experience with caregiving and loss had taught them that relationships require ongoing consent and mutual respect, rather than automatic obligation. The 9th year brought changes in my personal life that represented the full flowering of the independence and authenticity I had been working to achieve. Tom and I decided to start a family, a decision that would have been impossible during my years of financial and emotional servitude to my biological family. Pregnancy forced me to confront questions about family patterns, generational trauma, and the kind of parent I wanted to be. I was determined to raise children who understood the difference between love and exploitation, who knew that their worth wasn't measured by their usefulness to others, and who had the tools to maintain healthy boundaries throughout their lives. The decision about whether to inform my biological family about the pregnancy was complex. Part of me wanted to share the joy of this milestone, but I also recognized that a grandchild could become a new source of manipulation attempts and boundary violations. Ultimately, I decided that protecting my growing family was more important than managing my extended family's feelings about being excluded from this news. Christopher learned about the pregnancy through mutual friends and sent a congratulations card that was warm but respectful of boundaries. He didn't ask for photos or updates, didn't suggest that becoming a grandmother might heal Mum's relationship with me, and didn't imply that children should know their biological grandparents regardless of circumstances. His thoughtful response reinforced my impression that he had genuinely learned to respect other people's autonomy and decisions. It also highlighted the contrast between his growth and the continued dysfunction of other family members, who still viewed my life as something they should have access to regardless of our relationship status. When our daughter Emma was born, I felt a fierce protectiveness that clarified every boundary decision I had made over the past decade. Looking at her tiny face, I couldn't imagine exploiting her generosity, manipulating her emotions for financial gain, or treating her success as something that belonged to me rather than her. The experience of unconditional love for my child helped me understand how distorted my family's version of love had been. Real love celebrates the other person's independence and success, without seeking to control or exploit it. Real love respects boundaries and prioritizes the other person's well-being over your own convenience or desires. Emma's birth also brought clarity about the kind of family legacy I wanted to create. Instead of perpetuating patterns, Emma's birth also brought clarity about the kind of family legacy I wanted to create. Instead of perpetuating patterns of financial exploitation and emotional manipulation, I could establish traditions of mutual respect, healthy communication, and authentic love. My daughter would grow up understanding that family relationships should enhance, rather than drain your life, and that setting boundaries is a sign of self-respect rather than selfishness. First year of motherhood was transformative in ways I hadn't anticipated. Caring for Emma required the kind of selfless dedication I had once given to my biological family, but with a crucial difference. This sacrifice was freely chosen, and reciprocated with genuine love and appreciation. Emma didn't manipulate my emotions to get her needs met. She simply had needs that I was happy to fulfill, because I loved her unconditionally. The contrast highlighted how distorted my previous understanding of family relationships had been. I had confused exploitation with need, manipulation with love, and financial dependence with family connection. Motherhood taught me what healthy caregiving looked like when it wasn't complicated by ulterior motives and hidden agendas. But perhaps the most surprising aspect of early motherhood was how it affected my relationship with my own childhood experiences. Holding Emma, I found myself remembering moments of genuine affection and connection with my parents that had been overshadowed by years of manipulation and conflict. I could acknowledge that they had loved me in their own limited way, while also recognizing that love alone wasn't sufficient to justify tolerating abuse. This emotional complexity became more challenging when Christopher called to tell me that Mum had been asking about Emma and expressing regret about missing her granddaughter's childhood. According to Christopher, Mum had been doing her own reflection about family relationships and was beginning to understand why I had felt the need to establish such firm boundaries. "She's not asking for anything," Christopher assured me. "She's not trying to manipulate her way back into your life. She just wanted me to tell you that she loves you and Emma, even from a distance, and she hopes you're both healthy and happy." The message was touching, but also complicated. Part of me wanted to believe that Mum had genuinely grown and changed, that she finally understood the damage caused by years of financial and emotional exploitation. But I had learned to be cautious about interpreting family communications, especially those delivered through intermediaries, who might be unconsciously editing or interpreting the original message. More importantly, I had to consider Emma's well-being and safety. Even if Mum had experienced genuine personal growth, re-establishing contact would open doors to potential manipulation attempts that could affect my daughter's life and security. The stakes were no longer just about my own emotional and financial well-being. They included protecting my child from potentially toxic family dynamics. Tom and I discussed the situation extensively, weighing the potential benefits of family reconciliation against the documented history of manipulation and abuse. We decided that any contact with my biological family would need to meet strict criteria: acknowledgement of past wrongdoing, demonstrated behavioral change over an extended period, respect for our boundaries and parenting decisions, and acceptance that our primary obligation was to our nuclear family's well-being. These criteria were intentionally demanding because the history of manipulation was so extensive and sophisticated. Grand gestures and emotional appeals had been primary tools in previous reconciliation attempts, and we needed evidence of sustained change, rather than temporary remorse or strategic positioning. The 10th year brought professional opportunities that symbolized how completely my life had transformed since establishing independence from family financial abuse. I was offered a partnership opportunity to start my own firm, with 2 colleagues, who shared my values and vision for ethical, innovative accounting practices. The decision to leave Morrison & Associates was difficult, because they had provided stability and support during my transition to independence. But starting my own firm represented the ultimate expression of the autonomy and self-determination I had been working to achieve. It was also a way to create the kind of workplace culture I wished had existed during my years of struggling to balance career advancement with family exploitation. Our new firm, Pacific Financial Solutions, was designed around principles of work-life balance, ethical business practices, and supporting employees through personal challenges without exploiting their vulnerabilities. We offered financial wellness programs, mental health resources, and flexible scheduling that acknowledged that people had lives and obligations outside of work. The firm's success exceeded our expectations, attracting clients who valued our commitment to transparency and ethical practices. We specialized in helping small businesses and individuals develop sustainable financial strategies, and we often worked with people who had experienced financial trauma or exploitation in their personal relationships. This client work reinforced my understanding of how common financial abuse was, and how little support was available for people trying to recover from exploitative relationships. Many clients had stories similar to mine: family members who treated their success as communal property, romantic partners who used emotional manipulation to access their resources, or business associates who exploited their generosity and trust. The pattern was depressingly consistent across different demographics and circumstances. People who were naturally generous and responsible became targets for exploitation by individuals who prioritized their own immediate gratification over long-term relationship health. The exploiters used guilt, obligation, love, and family loyalty as weapons to maintain access to resources and support. But I also saw examples of successful recovery and boundary setting that gave me hope for other people trapped in similar situations. Clients who had escaped financial abuse often became the strongest advocates for healthy relationship dynamics and the most skilled at recognizing manipulation attempts. Their hard-won wisdom about boundaries and self-protection became resources for others facing comparable challenges. Working with these clients reinforced my conviction that sharing my story publicly had been worthwhile, despite the personal costs and ongoing family tension it had generated. Every person who recognized their own situation, in my experience, was potentially spared years of exploitation and emotional damage. The speaking engagements continued, evolving from simple presentations about my personal experience to more sophisticated workshops about recognizing and responding to financial abuse in various contexts. I collaborated with therapists, legal advocates, and financial advisors to develop comprehensive resources for people seeking to escape exploitative relationships. The work was emotionally demanding but deeply fulfilling. It allowed me to transform my personal trauma into a resource for social change, and it connected me with a community of people who understood the complexity of loving family members while protecting yourself from their harmful behavior. Emma's second birthday brought another attempt at family contact, this time more direct and potentially more manipulative than previous efforts. I received a package addressed to Emma containing a handmade photo album with pictures of family members and a letter from Mum addressed to my precious granddaughter. The letter was carefully crafted to avoid directly asking for contact while maximizing emotional impact. It described Mum's love for Emma, her sadness about missing important milestones, and her hope that someday they could meet and build a relationship. The tone was grandmotherly and loving, designed to evoke sympathy and guilt rather than direct manipulation, but the package also represented a boundary violation that couldn't be ignored. Despite the restraining order and years of no contact, they had found a way to send unsolicited materials to my home and directly target my child with emotional manipulation. The photo album included pictures of family members Emma had never met, presented as loving relatives who were being kept from her by my unreasonable boundaries. Tom and I recognized the package as a sophisticated escalation of manipulation tactics, designed to use Emma as leverage to re-establish contact and influence. The grandparental love angle was calculated to evoke guilt and social pressure, since most people believe children should have relationships with their grandparents, regardless of circumstances. We consulted with our family attorney about the boundary violation and its implications for the restraining order. The package didn't technically violate the letter of the legal restrictions, since it was addressed to Emma rather than me, and didn't explicitly request contact or threaten consequences. But it clearly violated the spirit of the no-contact order, and represented an attempt to manipulate our family dynamics. The attorney advised documenting the incident and sending a formal cease and desist letter, making clear that any future contact attempts, whether directed at Emma or other family members, would be considered harassment and would result in additional legal action. We also updated our home security and mail screening procedures to prevent similar incidents. The most disturbing aspect of the package was how it demonstrated that my family was willing to involve Emma in their manipulation campaigns, despite having no relationship with her and no understanding of her needs or well-being. They were treating my daughter as a tool for accessing me, rather than as an individual deserving of protection from adult conflicts. This incident reinforced my conviction that maintaining distance was necessary, not just for my own well-being, but for Emma's protection. Children who grow up in families with manipulative dynamics often learn that love is conditional on compliance, and that boundaries are selfish rather than healthy. I was determined to spare Emma those damaging lessons. The 11th year brought news that tested my emotional equilibrium in unexpected ways. Christopher called to inform me that Jenny had been diagnosed with breast cancer and was facing a difficult treatment process that would likely require surgery, chemotherapy, and extended recovery time. The news hit me harder than I had expected. Despite our complicated history and the financial exploitation that had characterized our relationship, Jenny was still my sister, and the thought of her facing a life-threatening illness was genuinely distressing. The old impulse to drop everything and rush to help was still strong, activated by years of conditioning and genuine concern for her well-being. But 11 years of therapy and boundary setting had taught me to distinguish between compassion and compulsion, between caring about someone's situation and automatically assuming responsibility for solving their problems. I could feel concerned about Jenny's health without necessarily involving myself in her treatment and care decisions. Christopher was careful not to ask for direct assistance or suggest that the cancer diagnosis should override my boundaries. He simply wanted me to know what was happening, in case I wanted to send well wishes, or had any desire to offer support from a distance. After much consideration, I decided to send a card expressing my sympathy and best wishes for her treatment and recovery. I also made a donation to a breast cancer research organization in Jenny's name, providing support for her cause without opening doors to renewed manipulation or direct contact. The card and donation felt like appropriate ways to express care while maintaining boundaries. They acknowledged our family connection and my concern for her well-being, without inviting renewed relationship complications or financial exploitation. Jenny's response, delivered through Christopher, was gracious and appreciative. She thanked me for the thoughtful gesture and assured me that she wasn't expecting anything more. According to Christopher, the cancer diagnosis had given her perspective on what was truly important in life, and she was focused on treatment and recovery, rather than family drama. Her response sounded genuine, but I also recognized that serious illness could be used as a manipulation tool by people who had previously exploited family loyalty and obligation. I remained cautious about interpreting her communications and committed to maintaining boundaries regardless of her health situation. The experience reinforced my understanding that you can care about someone's well-being without necessarily having a relationship with them. Distance doesn't equal indifference, and boundaries don't require cruelty or complete emotional disconnection. It's possible to wish someone well, while also protecting yourself from their potentially harmful behavior. Jenny's cancer treatment was successful, according to Christopher's updates, though the process was difficult and required significant lifestyle adjustments. She had used the recovery time to reevaluate her priorities and relationships, leading to some personal growth and changed perspectives on family dynamics. But more importantly for my own peace of mind, she had managed her illness and treatment with support from friends, medical professionals, and Marcus and Christopher, demonstrating that the family could function and provide mutual support without my involvement. They had proven to themselves and each other that they were capable of handling serious challenges independently. The 12th year brought a milestone I had been working toward since the early days of my independence: complete financial recovery from the years of family exploitation. Pacific Financial Solutions had grown substantially, my personal investments had performed well, and I had finally accumulated the wealth and security that would have been possible much earlier, without the drain of family financial obligations. But more significantly, I had developed the financial literacy and psychological strength to protect my resources from future exploitation attempts. I understood the difference between helping and enabling, between family support and financial abuse, between generous assistance and exploitative manipulation. The firm's success had also created opportunities to establish charitable giving programs that reflected my values and experiences. We developed a foundation that provided financial education and legal support for people escaping family financial abuse, offering resources that hadn't been available during my own struggle for independence. Working with clients and foundation recipients who were dealing with similar challenges kept me connected to the reality of how common these experiences were, while also highlighting how much my own life had changed. I could offer guidance and support based on lived experience, while maintaining healthy boundaries and professional distance. The foundation work was particularly meaningful, because it allowed me to channel my personal experience into broader social change. Instead of simply recovering from family financial abuse, I was helping create systems and resources that could prevent other people from experiencing similar exploitation. Emma's third birthday brought another package, this time containing what appeared to be a financial gift for her college education. The accompanying letter explained that Mum and the family had established a small education fund for Emma, as a way of showing their love and support for her future, even if they couldn't be part of her present life. The gesture was more sophisticated than previous contact attempts, because it appeared generous and future-focused, rather than immediately manipulative. Setting up an education fund seemed like something loving grandparents would do, and refusing such a gift could be portrayed as prioritizing grudges over Emma's financial well-being. But careful examination of the fund documents revealed concerning provisions, similar to those in the trust fund they had offered me years earlier. The money was contingent on Emma maintaining relationships with family members as she grew older, and the fund could be revoked if her parents were deemed to be alienating her from her extended family. The education fund wasn't a genuine gift. It was an attempted financial manipulation tool, designed to create leverage for future contact and influence. By accepting the money, we would be giving them legal grounds to argue for access to Emma, and a voice in her upbringing. We declined the fund and returned the documents with a letter explaining that genuine gifts don't come with conditions or strings attached. We also reiterated that any future contact attempts, whether direct or through third parties, would be considered harassment, and would result in legal action. The response to our rejection was swift and revealing. Within days I received angry messages from several extended family members accusing me of depriving Emma of financial opportunities, out of spite and selfishness. How could I put my grudges ahead of my daughter's education and future security? The reaction confirmed that the education fund had been designed as a manipulation tool, rather than a genuine gift. If they had truly been concerned about Emma's educational opportunities, they would have respected our decision, and perhaps donated the money to educational charities, instead of attempting to use it as leverage for family access. More importantly, the angry responses revealed that they still viewed Emma as a potential access point to me, rather than as an individual deserving of protection from adult manipulation and conflict. They were willing to use my daughter as a pawn in their ongoing attempts to re-establish control and influence. This incident led to updated legal protections and security measures, designed to prevent future manipulation attempts targeting Emma. We worked with attorneys to establish legal barriers to unsolicited contact and financial manipulation, ensuring that Emma would be protected as she grew older, and potentially became more vulnerable to family manipulation tactics. The 13th year brought professional recognition that exceeded anything I had imagined during my years of family financial servitude. Pacific Financial Solutions was named Small Business of the Year by the Regional Chamber of Commerce, and I was invited to serve on several non-profit boards, addressing financial literacy and family violence prevention. But the most meaningful recognition came from an unexpected source. The adult children of clients I had helped escape family financial abuse. Several young adults reached out to thank me for the guidance and support their parents had received, crediting our work with helping them understand healthy family dynamics and financial boundaries. These second-generation impacts reinforced my conviction that breaking cycles of family dysfunction had effects beyond the immediate individuals involved. Children who grew up with healthy financial boundaries and authentic family relationships were better equipped to maintain those patterns in their own adult lives. Emma's development was reflecting these healthier patterns in ways that were both gratifying and educational. At 3 years old, she was learning to express her needs directly rather than manipulatively, to respect other people's boundaries while maintaining her own, and to understand that love and approval weren't contingent on compliance or usefulness. Watching Emma navigate social situations with confidence and authenticity highlighted how different her childhood was from my own experience. She was learning that her value came from being herself, rather than from what she could provide for others, a lesson that could protect her from exploitation throughout her life. Tom and I were also modeling healthy relationship dynamics in ways that would shape Emma's understanding of how adults should treat each other. She was seeing that conflicts could be resolved through communication rather than manipulation, that financial decisions could be made jointly and transparently, and that boundaries were normal parts of loving relationships. The 14th year brought news that would test everything I had learned about forgiveness, growth, and the possibility of authentic change. Christopher called to tell me that Marcus had completed several years of therapy and wanted to meet with me, not to seek reconciliation but to take full responsibility for his past behavior and offer a genuine apology without expecting anything in return. He's not asking for a relationship or trying to get back into your life, Christopher explained carefully. He just wants the opportunity to acknowledge what he did and how it affected you. He understands if you're not interested, but he's hoping you might be willing to hear what he has to say. The request was different from previous contact attempts because it didn't include requests for resumed relationship, financial assistance, or access to Emma. Marcus wasn't positioning himself as a victim or minimizing his past behavior. According to Christopher, he had gained genuine insight into the patterns of manipulation and exploitation that had characterized his relationship with me. But I also recognized that sophisticated manipulators could learn to mimic accountability and remorse as tools for re-establishing access and influence. Years of experience with family manipulation had taught me to be cautious about grand gestures and emotional appeals, even when they appeared genuine. Dr. Martinez helped me work through the complex emotions that Marcus's request generated. Part of me was curious about whether he had genuinely changed, and what insights he might have gained through therapy. Another part of me was wary of any contact that could potentially reopen doors to manipulation or re-traumatize me through exposure to past dynamics. The key consideration was what I hoped to gain from such a meeting versus the potential risks it posed to my emotional well-being and family security. If Marcus had genuinely changed, hearing his apology might provide closure and validation. But if the meeting was another manipulation attempt, it could undermine my confidence and potentially threaten the boundaries I had worked so hard to establish. After months of consideration and therapeutic exploration, I decided that I was willing to meet with Marcus under carefully controlled conditions. The meeting would take place in a public location, with a time limit. I would bring a support person, and it would be understood that the meeting didn't constitute renewed relationship or ongoing contact. Most importantly, I made clear that the meeting was for my benefit and curiosity, rather than to provide Marcus with absolution or renewed access to my life. If he was genuinely committed to accountability and personal growth, he would respect these boundaries and accept that his healing process was separate from any relationship with me. The meeting took place at a coffee shop near my office, with my therapist present as a support person and observer. Marcus arrived on time and appeared nervous but determined. His appearance and demeanor suggested that he had indeed undergone significant personal changes, looking healthier and more grounded than I remembered. His apology was detailed and specific, acknowledging particular incidents of manipulation and exploitation that I hadn't expected him to remember or understand. He took full responsibility for his behavior, without offering excuses or minimizing the impact on my life and well-being. Most importantly, he acknowledged the financial damage he had caused and expressed understanding of why I had needed to establish such firm boundaries. "I used to think you were being dramatic and oversensitive," he said. "But therapy helped me understand that what we did to you was financial and emotional abuse. We treated you like a resource instead of a person, and we used your love for us as a weapon against you. I can't undo the damage I caused, but I wanted you to know that I finally understand what really happened, and that it was completely wrong." The apology felt genuine in ways I hadn't expected. Marcus's body language, tone, and specific acknowledgements suggested that he had gained real insight into family dynamics and his own behavior patterns. He wasn't making excuses or asking for anything in return. He was simply taking responsibility for harm he had caused. But perhaps most importantly, he demonstrated respect for my boundaries by not pushing for ongoing contact or relationship reconciliation. He thanked me for being willing to meet with him, acknowledged that I had no obligation to forgive him or resume any kind of relationship, and expressed hope that I was happy and successful in my new life. The meeting lasted about an hour, and ended with a simple handshake. Marcus thanked me again for listening and walked away without asking for my contact information or suggesting future meetings. The interaction felt like genuine closure, rather than an opening for renewed manipulation. Processing the meeting with Dr. Martinez was complex and emotional. I felt surprised by Marcus's apparent growth, and touched by his willingness to take full responsibility, without seeking anything in return. But I also felt cautious about interpreting the interaction, and determined to maintain my boundaries regardless of his personal development. The key insight was that Marcus's growth was positive for him, and might benefit his future relationships, but it didn't obligate me to resume contact or trust him with renewed access to my life. People can change and grow, while their past victims maintain protective boundaries, and both processes can be healthy and appropriate. I sent a brief note through Christopher thanking Marcus for his honesty and accountability, while making clear that the meeting represented closure, rather than renewed relationship. I wished him well in his continued growth and recovery while maintaining that my family's well-being remained my primary priority. The 15th year brought the birth of our son David, expanding our family and reinforcing my commitment to protecting my children from potentially toxic family dynamics. David's arrival reminded me of how much my life had changed since the early days of family financial exploitation, and how important it was to maintain the healthy boundaries that made this stability possible. Emma, now 4 years old, was excited about becoming a big sister, and helped with David's care in age-appropriate ways. Watching her gentle interactions with her baby brother reinforced my confidence that she was developing healthy relationship skills and emotional intelligence that would serve her throughout her life. The contrast between my children's secure, loving family environment and the chaotic, manipulative dynamics of my childhood was stark and gratifying. Emma and David were learning that love was unconditional, that their needs mattered, and that healthy relationships enhanced, rather than drained, their well-being. But perhaps most importantly, they were growing up in a family where financial resources were managed transparently and responsibly, where help was offered freely without strings attached, and where boundaries were respected, rather than violated. These lessons would protect them from exploitation, while teaching them to maintain healthy relationships throughout their lives. The foundation work continued to expand, providing resources and support for increasing numbers of people escaping family financial abuse. We had developed comprehensive programs that included legal assistance, financial education, therapeutic support, and practical resources for establishing independence from exploitative relationships. Working with foundation clients reinforced my understanding of how common these experiences were across different demographics and family structures. Financial abuse wasn't limited to any particular cultural background, socioeconomic status, or family configuration. It occurred wherever individuals prioritized their own immediate gratification over long-term relationship health. But I also saw encouraging examples of people who had successfully escaped exploitation and built healthy, independent lives. Their stories provided hope and practical guidance for others facing similar challenges, creating a community of support and understanding that was crucial for recovery and growth. The speaking engagements had evolved into consultation work with other professionals serving clients who had experienced family financial abuse. I provided training for therapists, attorneys, and financial advisors about recognizing exploitation patterns and supporting clients through boundary setting and independence processes. This professional development work was particularly meaningful because it multiplied the impact of my personal experience by training other professionals to provide more effective support. Instead of helping individuals one at a time, I was helping create systemic changes that could benefit thousands of people over time. The 16th year brought news that represented a final test of my emotional growth and boundary setting skills. Christopher called to tell me that Mum had been diagnosed with early-stage dementia and was beginning to show signs of confusion and memory loss that would likely worsen over time. The diagnosis was complicated by the fact that Mum was living alone and had limited financial resources for specialized care. Marcus and Jenny were willing to help with caregiving responsibilities, but they were struggling with the emotional and practical challenges of managing a parent's declining cognitive abilities. Christopher wasn't asking me to get involved or provide assistance, but he wanted me to know about Mum's condition, in case I had feelings or concerns I wanted to process. He also mentioned that Mum had been talking about me more frequently, as her memory became less reliable, often forgetting about our estrangement, and asking when I would visit. The news generated complex emotions that were difficult to categorize or resolve. I felt sad about Mum's declining health, and the loss of cognitive abilities that defined her personality and independence. I also felt guilty about not being available to help with her care, despite the rational understanding that my absence was necessary for my own well-being and family security. But perhaps most challenging was learning that Mum's deteriorating memory was erasing her understanding of our estrangement and the reasons for it. In her confused state, she was remembering me as a loving daughter who simply lived far away, rather than someone who had cut contact due to financial abuse and exploitation. This development forced me to confront questions about responsibility, forgiveness, and the nature of relationships with people whose personalities and behaviors changed due to illness. Was Mum still the person who had manipulated and exploited me, or had the dementia created a different version of her who deserved different consideration? Dr. Martinez helped me work through these philosophical and emotional complexities, without pressure to reach any particular conclusion. The key insight was that my response to Mum's illness should be based on my own needs and values, rather than external expectations or guilt about her condition. After extensive consideration, I decided to maintain my boundaries while acknowledging the tragedy of Mum's illness. I sent a card expressing sympathy for her diagnosis and best wishes for her care, but I didn't offer to provide assistance or visit. The decision felt appropriate given our history while also honoring my genuine sadness about her declining health. The response from other family members was mixed, but generally respectful of my boundaries. Christopher thanked me for the card and assured me that they weren't expecting anything more. Marcus and Jenny, according to Christopher, were focused on Mum's care rather than family relationship dynamics. But perhaps most telling was that Mum's dementia was forcing the family to confront practical caregiving responsibilities that they had never had to manage without my involvement. They were learning to coordinate care schedules, manage medical appointments, and make difficult decisions about treatment and living arrangements. The experience was teaching them skills and perspectives that might have developed earlier if I had been less available to absorb family crises and responsibilities. They were discovering that caregiving required sacrifices and difficult choices that couldn't be shifted to someone else. Christopher's update suggested that the caregiving experience was generating some insights about family responsibility and mutual support, though the lessons were being learned under challenging circumstances. Marcus and Jenny were discovering that taking care of an aging parent required time, energy, and emotional resources that affected their other life priorities, but they were also finding satisfaction in providing care and support that was genuinely needed and appreciated. Mum's gratitude for their help was immediate and authentic in ways that her previous manipulation attempts had never been. They were experiencing what it felt like to give assistance that enhanced rather than enabled dysfunctional behavior. The 17th year brought professional opportunities that allowed me to expand the foundation's impact beyond individual client services. We received grants to develop educational programs for high schools and colleges about financial literacy and healthy relationship dynamics, reaching young people before they became vulnerable to exploitation. The educational programs were designed to teach students how to recognize manipulation tactics, establish healthy financial boundaries, and build relationships based on mutual respect rather than obligation or guilt. The curriculum included practical skills like budget management and debt avoidance, alongside emotional intelligence training about communication and boundary setting. Working with young people was particularly rewarding because they were often more open to learning healthy relationship skills than adults who had spent years in dysfunctional patterns. Students who learned these concepts early were better equipped to recognize and avoid exploitative relationships throughout their lives. The program evaluations showed significant improvements in students' ability to identify manipulation tactics and their confidence in maintaining personal boundaries. Many students reported that the training had helped them navigate family, romantic, and friendship dynamics more effectively. But perhaps most gratifying were the letters from students who credited the program with helping them escape or avoid exploitative relationships. Several young people wrote to describe how the training had helped them recognize financial manipulation by family members, romantic partners, or friends, and given them tools to protect themselves. These outcomes reinforced my conviction that education and awareness were crucial for preventing family financial abuse. Many people entered adulthood without understanding the difference between healthy support and exploitative manipulation, making them vulnerable to individuals who prioritized their own needs over relationship health. Emma's 5th birthday brought another milestone in her development as a confident, articulate child who understood her own worth and boundaries. At 5 years old, she was already demonstrating emotional intelligence and communication skills that would protect her from manipulation throughout her life. Watching Emma interact with friends, teachers, and family members, I could see that she was learning to express her needs directly, respect other people's boundaries, and understand that relationships should be mutually beneficial rather than one-sided. These skills would serve her well as she navigated increasingly complex social situations. David, now approaching his second birthday, was developing similar emotional security and confidence. Both children were growing up with the understanding that they were loved unconditionally, and that their well-being was a priority for the adults in their lives. The contrast between my children's emotional security and my own childhood experiences of conditional love and financial exploitation was profound and gratifying. Emma and David were learning lessons that would protect them from exploitation while enabling them to build healthy, authentic relationships throughout their lives. But perhaps most importantly, they were growing up in a family where financial resources were managed transparently and generously, without creating dependence or obligation. They were learning that money could be a tool for creating security and opportunities rather than a weapon for controlling and manipulating others. The 18th year brought news that would represent a final chapter in my family's story and my own journey toward complete independence and peace. Christopher called to tell me that Mum had passed away peacefully in her sleep, surrounded by family members who had been providing her care during the final stages of her dementia. The news generated complex emotions that were difficult to process and categorize. I felt sad about Mum's death, and the loss of any possibility for reconciliation or authentic relationship. I also felt relief that her suffering from dementia was over, and that the family's caregiving responsibilities had ended. But perhaps most significantly, I felt a sense of closure and completion that I hadn't expected. Mum's death marked the end of an era of family dysfunction and the beginning of whatever relationships might be possible with my siblings, based on their current growth and understanding, rather than old patterns and dynamics. Christopher's call informing me of Mum's death was respectful and considerate, providing basic information without emotional manipulation or pressure to attend the funeral. He mentioned that they would be holding a small service for family and close friends, and that I was welcome to attend if I wanted to say goodbye, but that they understood if I preferred to grieve privately. The decision about whether to attend Mum's funeral was complex and emotional. Part of me wanted to say goodbye and find closure through participating in the ritual of mourning. Another part of me was concerned about exposing myself to potential manipulation or re-traumatization during a vulnerable time. After extensive discussion with Tom and Dr. Martinez, I decided to attend the funeral, but with careful boundaries and support systems in place. Tom would accompany me. We would arrive shortly before the service and leave immediately afterward, and I would avoid extended conversations or family gatherings that might create opportunities for manipulation. The funeral was small and dignified, focusing on Mum's positive qualities and the love she had inspired, despite her flaws and mistakes. The service acknowledged her struggles with family relationships, without dwelling on conflicts or blame, creating space for genuine grief and reflection. Seeing Marcus, Jenny, and Christopher at the funeral was emotional but not traumatic. They all appeared to have grown and changed in positive ways, looking healthier and more grounded than I remembered. Their interactions with each other seemed more respectful and authentic than the competitive, manipulative dynamics of our childhood. Marcus approached me briefly after the service to thank me for coming, and to reiterate his understanding of why our relationship had needed to end. He didn't ask for renewed contact, or suggest that Mum's death should change our boundaries. His acknowledgement felt genuine and respectful. Jenny was more emotional, but equally respectful of boundaries. She expressed sadness about our estrangement and hopes that someday we might be able to have some kind of relationship. But she didn't pressure me for immediate reconciliation or ongoing contact. Christopher walked with Tom and me to our car, providing a natural opportunity for brief conversation without formal family gathering obligations. He thanked me for attending and updated me briefly on his own life and career, which seemed to be going well. The overall experience felt like appropriate closure, rather than opening for renewed family involvement. I was able to say goodbye to Mum and acknowledge the positive aspects of our relationship, while maintaining the boundaries that protected my current life and family well-being. Processing Mum's death and the funeral experience took several months of therapeutic work and personal reflection. I found myself grieving not just for Mum's death, but for the relationship we never had, and the family dynamics that had made authentic connection impossible. But I also felt gratitude for the journey that had led me away from family dysfunction toward independence, authentic relationships, and personal fulfillment. Mum's death marked the end of that particular chapter while highlighting how much my life had changed and grown. The 19th year brought recognition that my personal journey from family financial abuse to independence and success had created ripple effects far beyond my own life and immediate family. The foundation had helped hundreds of people escape exploitative relationships, The educational programs had reached thousands of students, and the professional training had equipped dozens of therapists and advisors with better tools for supporting clients. But perhaps most significantly, Emma and David were growing up with emotional intelligence and relationship skills that would protect them from exploitation, while enabling them to build healthy, authentic connections throughout their lives. The cycle of family dysfunction that had characterized previous generations was definitively broken. Pacific Financial Solutions continued to thrive, providing ethical, transparent financial services while maintaining the work-life balance and employee well-being priorities that reflected my values and experiences. The firm had become a model for other businesses seeking to prioritize social responsibility alongside financial success. The speaking and consultation work had evolved into writing projects, including a book about recognizing and escaping family financial abuse that would reach even broader audiences. The book combined personal narrative with practical guidance and professional insights, creating a comprehensive resource for people facing similar challenges. But perhaps the most meaningful recognition came from completely unexpected sources: former clients, foundation recipients, students, and other professionals who credited my work with helping them understand and address family dysfunction in their own lives and practices. These testimonials reinforced my conviction that personal struggles could be transformed into resources for social change when approached with courage, authenticity, and commitment to helping others. My experience with family financial abuse had been painful and traumatic, but it had also provided insights and perspectives that could benefit many other people. The 20th year brought a sense of completion and satisfaction that I had never expected to achieve. Emma was now 10 years old, a confident, articulate child who understood her own worth and maintained healthy boundaries in all her relationships. David was 8, displaying similar emotional intelligence and communication skills. Both children were excelling academically and socially, developing friendships and interests that reflected their secure attachment and authentic self-understanding. They were growing up with the knowledge that they were loved unconditionally, and that their well-being was a priority for the adults in their lives. Tom and I had built a marriage based on mutual respect, transparent communication, and shared values that continue to deepen and strengthen over time. Our relationship modeled for Emma and David what healthy adult partnerships looked like, providing them with templates for their own future relationships. Pacific Financial Solutions had grown into a regional firm with multiple offices and dozens of employees, all committed to the ethical practices and social responsibility that had guided our founding principles. We had proven that business success and social consciousness could coexist and reinforce each other. The foundation had become a nationally recognized resource for people escaping family financial abuse, providing comprehensive services and developing innovative programs that address the complex emotional, legal, and practical challenges involved in establishing independence from exploitative relationships. As I sit in my office now, 20 years after that first boundary-setting conversation, I often think about the woman I used to be. She was kind and generous and loving, but she was also lost. As I sit in my office now, 20 years after that first boundary-setting conversation, I often think about the woman I used to be. She was kind and generous and loving, but she was also lost. She had confused self-sacrifice with virtue, enabling with support, and martyrdom with love. The woman I am now is still kind and generous and loving, but she's also strong. She knows the difference between helping and enabling. She understands that healthy relationships require reciprocity, not one-sided sacrifice. She's learned that setting boundaries isn't selfish. It's essential for maintaining relationships that honor everyone's dignity and autonomy. The journey from financial servitude to authentic independence wasn't just about money, though the financial abuse was the catalyst that forced me to examine every aspect of my family relationships. It was about learning to value myself enough to demand respect, to recognize that love without boundaries isn't really love at all, and to understand that some relationships, no matter how much history they carry, are too toxic to maintain. The most profound realization came gradually, over years of therapy and careful observation of healthy relationships. My family's version of love had been conditional on my compliance and usefulness. Real love celebrates the other person's independence and success without seeking to control or exploit it. Real love respects boundaries and prioritizes the other person's well-being over your own convenience or desires. Emma bounded into my office this morning, her backpack bouncing as she prepared for another day of 5th grade. At 10 years old, she radiates the kind of confidence and self-assurance that I didn't develop until my 30s. When her friend Madison tried to pressure her into sharing her lunch money last week, Emma calmly explained that she needed her money for lunch, and offered to help Madison talk to the school counselor about getting assistance if money was tight at home. The incident was minor, but it demonstrated everything I had hoped to teach her about boundaries, kindness, and the difference between helping and enabling. Emma had shown compassion for her friend's situation, without automatically sacrificing her own needs. She had offered appropriate help, while maintaining her boundaries. David, now 8 and equally secure in his sense of self-worth, had handled a similar situation when his teammate tried to pressure him into giving up his spot in the starting lineup. Because friends share everything. David had kindly but firmly explained that team positions were earned through practice and effort, and that real friends supported each other's achievements, rather than asking them to give up their successes. These small moments validated every difficult decision I had made about establishing boundaries and protecting my children from the dysfunctional relationship patterns that had characterized my own childhood. Emma and David were learning lessons that would protect them from exploitation throughout their lives. The contrast between their secure, healthy family environment and the chaotic, manipulative dynamics of my childhood was profound. They were growing up understanding that love was unconditional, that their needs mattered, and that healthy relationships enhanced rather than drained their well-being. But perhaps most importantly, they were learning these lessons through positive modeling, rather than painful experience. They wouldn't need to escape toxic family dynamics in their 30s because they were developing healthy relationship skills from the beginning. Tom knocked on my office door, carrying David's forgotten science project and wearing the patient, amused expression that meant one of our children had provided entertainment during breakfast. After 15 years of marriage, he still approached family challenges with the kind of calm problem-solving that had initially seemed foreign to me after years of family crisis management. David announced that he wants to be a scientist when he grows up, so he can help people without taking their money, Tom reported with a grin. I think he's been listening to your foundation work presentations. The comment was both amusing and touching. David had absorbed lessons about ethical service and genuine help through casual exposure to my work, developing values that would guide his own career choices and relationship decisions. He understood instinctively that helping others should enhance, rather than exploit their circumstances. This kind of unconscious learning was happening constantly in our household. Emma and David were developing emotional intelligence and ethical frameworks through daily observation of healthy adult relationships and explicit discussions about respect, boundaries, and mutual support. The Foundation's latest project involved developing resources for teenagers who were beginning to experience family financial pressure as they approached college age. Many young people found themselves caught between their own educational goals and family expectations that they would contribute financially or choose less expensive options to accommodate family needs. The program taught students how to distinguish between reasonable family financial discussions and manipulative pressure, how to maintain their educational goals while showing appropriate family consideration, and how to recognize when family financial problems were being inappropriately shifted to younger generation members. Working with these students reminded me of my own college experience, when I had commuted from home and worked multiple jobs to help support the family, while my educational and social opportunities suffered. These students were learning skills I wished I had possessed at their age. The most rewarding aspect of the teen program was seeing young people develop confidence in their right to pursue their own goals while maintaining loving family relationships. They were learning that caring about family welfare didn't require sacrificing their own futures, and that healthy families supported, rather than undermined, each member's individual success. One student, Maria, had written to thank the program for helping her navigate her parents' expectation that she would live at home and work to support younger siblings, instead of attending the university that had offered her a full scholarship. The program had given her language and strategies for expressing love for her family, while pursuing her educational goals. Another student, James, credited the program with helping him recognize that his older brother's requests for loans were actually financial manipulation designed to maintain dependence and control. He had learned to offer appropriate support while protecting his own resources and future plans. These success stories reinforced my conviction that education and early intervention were crucial for preventing family financial abuse. Young people who understood healthy relationship dynamics were much less likely to become trapped in exploitative patterns as adults. The book I had written about family financial abuse was approaching its second anniversary in publication, and had reached far beyond the audience I had originally envisioned. Mental health professionals were using it as a resource for clients, financial advisors were recommending it to customers dealing with family money conflicts, and college counselors were incorporating its concepts into financial literacy programs. But perhaps most gratifying were the personal messages from readers who had recognized their own experiences in my story and found courage to establish healthier boundaries in their own family relationships. Several people had written to describe how the book had helped them escape exploitation or prevent their children from experiencing similar manipulation. The speaking engagements had evolved beyond personal storytelling into comprehensive workshops that addressed the systemic factors that enabled family financial abuse. I was working with professional organizations to develop training programs for therapists, attorneys, and financial advisors about recognizing and addressing these dynamics in their practice. The work was emotionally demanding, but intellectually stimulating and socially meaningful. It allowed me to transform personal trauma into resources for systemic change, while building a career that aligned with my values and experiences. Pacific Financial Solutions had grown into a firm with national recognition for our innovative approaches to ethical financial services and employee well-being. We had proven that businesses could prioritize social responsibility alongside profitability, creating sustainable success that benefited all stakeholders. The firm's employee policies reflected lessons I had learned about work-life balance and personal boundaries. We offered flexible scheduling that accommodated family obligations, mental health resources that supported personal development, and financial wellness programs that helped employees build security and independence. Our client services emphasized education and empowerment, rather than dependence on professional management. We taught clients to understand and participate in their financial decisions, building their capacity for independent money management, rather than creating ongoing dependence on our services. This approach had attracted clients who valued transparency and ethical practices, creating a business model that was both financially successful and personally fulfilling. We had demonstrated that treating people with respect and honesty was not only morally appropriate, but also strategically advantageous. The 20th anniversary of my initial boundary-setting conversation approached with little fanfare, but significant personal reflection. 2 decades had passed since that tearful evening, when I had finally acknowledged that my family's treatment of me constituted financial and emotional abuse. The transformation had been gradual and often painful, requiring years of therapy, legal intervention, and careful relationship rebuilding. But the results exceeded anything I'd imagined possible during those early days of establishing independence. Christopher had maintained respectful, limited contact over the years, providing occasional updates about family developments without pressure for renewed involvement. His own growth and development had been substantial, and he had become a successful social worker, specializing in family dysfunction and elder care. Marcus had completed his therapy and personal development work, building a stable career and healthy marriage that demonstrated genuine change and growth. He had never again asked for financial assistance, or attempted to manipulate family relationships for personal benefit. Jenny had survived her cancer treatment and used the experience to reevaluate her priorities and relationships. She had developed a successful art therapy practice that combined her creative talents with meaningful service to others facing health challenges. Their individual growth was gratifying and suggested that people were capable of change when consequences and circumstances demanded it, but their personal development hadn't obligated me to resume relationships that might threaten my own well-being and family security. The most important lesson of the past 20 years was that love and boundaries could coexist, that caring about someone's welfare didn't require accepting their harmful behavior, and that protecting yourself from exploitation wasn't selfishness but necessary self-care. This understanding had informed every relationship decision I had made since establishing independence. Tom and I had built a marriage based on mutual respect and shared responsibility, rather than one-sided sacrifice. Emma and David were learning that healthy relationships enhanced rather than drained their well-being. The foundation work had connected me with hundreds of people who had faced similar challenges and decisions. Their stories reinforced my understanding that family financial abuse was a widespread problem that required systemic solutions rather than individual endurance. But their recovery stories also demonstrated that escape and healing were possible with appropriate support and resources. People who had experienced family exploitation could build healthy, independent lives that honored their values while protecting their well-being. The most surprising aspect of my journey had been discovering that establishing boundaries and prioritizing self-care had actually increased my capacity for genuine generosity and service. When my resources weren't being drained by manipulation and exploitation, I had energy and assets available for meaningful philanthropy and social contribution. The foundation's work, the educational programs, the professional training, and the book had all emerged from the stability and independence that boundary setting had created. My ability to help others had been enhanced, rather than diminished, by refusing to enable family dysfunction. This paradox challenged conventional wisdom about family loyalty and sacrifice, but it reflected a deeper truth about sustainable relationships and authentic service. You can't pour from an empty cup, and you can't provide genuine help when you're drowning in your own exploitation. Emma School had invited me to speak at their annual parent education evening about teaching children healthy relationship skills. The presentation would focus on age-appropriate ways to help children understand boundaries, respect, and the difference between helping and enabling. Preparing for the presentation reminded me of how much my parenting approach had been influenced by my experiences with family dysfunction. Every lesson I taught Emma and David about relationships was informed by hard-won understanding of what healthy dynamics looked like versus the manipulation and exploitation I had experienced. The irony wasn't lost on me that my worst family experiences had ultimately made me a better parent, partner, and professional. The pain and struggle of establishing independence had generated insights and skills that benefited not only my own life, but also the lives of many other people. David's interest in science was flourishing, and he had begun talking about wanting to develop medical treatments that would help people without making them dependent or vulnerable. His career aspirations reflected values about service and ethics that he was absorbing through our family discussions and my professional work. Emma had expressed interest in law, specifically wanting to help children who were being treated unfairly by adults who were supposed to protect them. Her sense of justice and advocacy had been shaped by understanding that adults had responsibilities to nurture and protect, rather than exploit children's resources or loyalty. Both children were developing career interests that reflected their understanding of ethical service and social responsibility. They were learning that meaningful work involved enhancing other people's circumstances rather than exploiting their vulnerabilities. Tom's teaching career had also been influenced by our family experiences and values. He had developed innovative approaches to helping students build emotional intelligence and relationship skills, incorporating lessons about boundaries and respect into his classroom management and curriculum design. His students were learning that healthy relationships required mutual consideration, and that academic success didn't need to come at the expense of personal well-being. Tom was modeling the kind of respectful, supportive adult leadership that could prevent young people from becoming vulnerable to exploitation. Our marriage had become a source of strength and stability that enhanced both of our individual capacities for professional and personal contribution. Instead of draining each other's resources through manipulation or dependence, we were creating synergies that amplified our combined impact. The contrast with my family of origin's dynamics was profound and illuminating. Where they had created competition and resentment through exploitation and favoritism, Tom and I had built collaboration and mutual support through respect and transparency. Where my parents had used guilt and obligation to control their children's choices, we were teaching Emma and David to make decisions based on their own values and goals, while considering appropriate family and social responsibilities. Where my siblings had learned to compete for resources and attention, Emma and David were learning to celebrate each other's successes and provide mutual support during challenges. The Foundation's research had documented similar patterns across many families, dealing with financial abuse and exploitation. Healthy families created upward spirals of mutual support and individual growth, while dysfunctional families created downward spirals of competition and resentment. Breaking dysfunctional patterns required someone to refuse participation in exploitation and manipulation, even when that refusal was met with anger, guilt, and social pressure. The person who established boundaries often faced criticism and isolation, but their courage created possibilities for healthier dynamics. My decision to prioritize my own well-being and establish firm boundaries had initially been seen as selfish and destructive. 20 years later, it had created opportunities for authentic family growth and had protected the next generation from continuing cycles of dysfunction. The most profound realization was that saving myself had ultimately served my family's best interests, even though they had resisted and resented my boundary setting at the time. By refusing to enable their exploitation and manipulation, I had forced them to develop healthier coping skills and relationship patterns. Marcus's successful therapy and career development, Jenny's meaningful work and cancer recovery, and Christopher's professional growth and family service had all been facilitated by their need to function independently. After I stopped absorbing their problems and responsibilities, they had proven capable of much more growth and contribution than anyone had expected when they were depending on my subsidies and crisis management. My absence had created space for their own development and success. This outcome challenged popular narratives about family loyalty and sacrifice, but it reflected deeper truths about enabling versus empowerment, and short-term versus long-term well-being. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for people is refuse to rescue them from the consequences of their choices. The Foundation's work with families in crisis often involved helping individuals understand this distinction between helping and enabling. Many people struggled with guilt about setting boundaries with family members who claimed to need their assistance. But our research consistently showed that people who were rescued from natural consequences rarely developed the skills and motivation needed for sustainable change. Enablers thought they were helping, but they were actually preventing growth and independence. The most effective interventions involved supporting people's own efforts to improve their circumstances, rather than removing obstacles or providing resources that reduced their motivation for personal development. My family's eventual growth and success had vindicated my decision to stop enabling their dysfunction, but the validation had taken years to emerge and hadn't been guaranteed. I had needed to make difficult choices based on my own well-being rather than hopes for their eventual improvement. This lesson informed my advice to Foundation clients who were struggling with similar decisions. You couldn't control other people's responses to healthy boundaries, but you could protect yourself from continued exploitation and create space for your own growth and development. Some family members would eventually develop healthier patterns when enabling stopped, but others would continue destructive behaviors or escalate manipulation attempts. Either outcome was information about their character and priorities, rather than evidence of your success or failure as a family member. The key insight was that you could only control your own choices and responses, not other people's behavior or growth. Setting boundaries based on your own needs and values was appropriate regardless of how others responded. Tom and I were planning a family vacation to Europe for the following summer, something that would have been impossible during my years of financial obligation to my biological family. Emma and David were excited about visiting historical sites and experiencing different cultures, and I was looking forward to creating positive family memories based on shared adventure rather than crisis management. The vacation planning reminded me of how much my life had changed since establishing independence. Instead of calculating whether I could afford experiences based on family financial obligations, I was making decisions based on our family's interests and resources. More importantly, I was modeling for Emma and David that financial resources could be used for enrichment and joy, rather than just crisis management and obligation. They were learning that money could create opportunities and security, rather than serving as a tool for manipulation and control. The Foundation's latest project involved developing financial literacy curricula for elementary schools, teaching children age-appropriate lessons about money management, family financial dynamics, and the difference between helpful support and manipulative pressure. Working with young children was particularly rewarding, because they were naturally interested in fairness and justice. They instinctively understood that relationships should be mutually beneficial, and that helping others shouldn't require sacrificing your own well-being. The children's questions and observations often provided insights that adult clients found difficult to grasp. They understood immediately that love shouldn't hurt, and that family members should want each other to succeed, rather than competing for resources or attention. Emma and David had both participated in pilot versions of the curriculum, providing feedback about age-appropriate language and concepts. Their involvement had helped me understand how to present complex relationship dynamics in ways that children could understand and apply. Their natural confidence and boundary-setting skills had impressed their teachers and served as positive examples for classmates who were dealing with more challenging family dynamics. They were already serving as informal peer educators about healthy relationships. The 20th anniversary of my boundary-setting journey approached during a particularly busy time at the Foundation. We were launching new programs, publishing research findings, and training additional staff to meet growing demand for our services. But I made time for personal reflection about the transformation that had occurred over 2 decades. The scared, exhausted woman who had finally said no to family financial exploitation had evolved into someone who was confident, successful, and genuinely happy. The journey hadn't been easy or straightforward. There had been years of therapy, legal challenges, professional setbacks, and personal doubt. But every difficult moment had contributed to building the strength and wisdom that now characterized my life. Most importantly, the struggle had generated insights and experiences that could help other people facing similar challenges. My personal trauma had been transformed into resources for social change and individual empowerment. The Foundation had helped hundreds of people escape family financial abuse. The educational programs had reached thousands of students. The professional training had equipped dozens of therapists and advisors with better tools for supporting clients. But perhaps the most significant impact was the example I had provided for Emma and David about the importance of self-respect, healthy boundaries, and authentic relationships. They were growing up with emotional intelligence and relationship skills that would protect them throughout their lives. The book's success had generated invitations for television interviews and documentary participation that would reach even broader audiences. The media attention was sometimes overwhelming, but it provided opportunities to raise awareness about family financial abuse and the resources available for people seeking to escape exploitation. The most meaningful interview had been with a local news program that focused on Emma and David's perspective on growing up in a family that prioritized boundaries and mutual respect. Their articulate, confident responses had demonstrated the positive effects of healthy family dynamics. Emma had explained that their family worked because everyone's feelings and needs mattered equally, and that problems were solved through communication rather than manipulation. David had added that their parents taught them to help others without hurting themselves, and that real love made people stronger rather than weaker. Their insights had resonated with viewers and generated numerous requests for additional family interviews and speaking engagements. But Tom and I were careful to protect their privacy and avoid exploiting their wisdom for professional benefit. The children's natural emotional intelligence was the result of growing up in a healthy family environment, not performance training or media coaching. We wanted them to continue developing authentically, rather than becoming public examples of our parenting approach. Pacific Financial Solutions had opened its 5th office and hired its 50th employee, all while maintaining the ethical practices and employee well-being priorities that had guided our founding vision. We had proven that businesses could grow and succeed while prioritizing social responsibility and human dignity. The firm's success had created opportunities for additional charitable giving and community investment. We were funding scholarships for students from financially abusive families, supporting research into family financial dynamics, and providing pro bono services for people escaping exploitation. The business model demonstrated that ethical practices and social consciousness could enhance, rather than limit, financial success. Our reputation for integrity and transparency had attracted high-quality clients and employees who shared our values and contributed to our continued growth. The professional recognition was gratifying, but the personal satisfaction of building something meaningful and sustainable was even more rewarding. The firm represented the kind of organization I had wished existed during my own struggles with family financial abuse. Christopher's Christmas card arrived with a family photo showing him with his wife and 2 young children, all looking healthy and happy. His note mentioned that he was being promoted to program director at his social services agency, and that his family was doing well. The card represented the kind of limited but respectful contact that was possible when boundaries were honored and manipulation was absent. Christopher had learned to maintain family connection without attempting to control or exploit, creating space for positive relationship despite past difficulties. His personal and professional growth was gratifying and suggested that people were capable of learning healthier relationship patterns when consequences and circumstances demanded change. But his development hadn't obligated me to resume closer contact or greater involvement. The key lesson was that you could appreciate someone's growth while maintaining boundaries that protected your own well-being. Relationships could be respectful and caring without being close or deeply involved. Marcus's wedding announcement had arrived the previous year, along with a brief note thanking me again for the meeting we had shared, and mentioning that he and his fiancée were both committed to building a relationship based on mutual respect and transparency. The announcement represented closure on a complicated chapter, while acknowledging that people could change and grow beyond their past mistakes. But it also reinforced my conviction that his personal development was separate from any obligation on my part to resume family relationship. Jenny's art therapy practice had been featured in a professional journal article about innovative approaches to trauma treatment. According to the article, her own experiences with family dysfunction and serious illness had given her unique insights into helping clients navigate difficult relationships and life challenges. Her professional success was gratifying, and suggested that she had transformed her personal struggles into resources for helping others. But like Marcus and Christopher, her growth didn't obligate me to reconsider my boundaries or resume contact. The most important realization was that I could feel happy about their success and growth, while maintaining the distance that protected my own well-being and family security. Their positive development was good for them and potentially beneficial for other people in their lives, but it didn't change the fundamental incompatibility between their past behavior and my current needs. Emma's 10th birthday party was a celebration of friendship, creativity, and joy that contrasted sharply with my own childhood birthday experiences. Instead of family drama and obligation, there was laughter, games, and genuine celebration of Emma's personality and achievements. Watching Emma interact with her friends, I was struck by her natural confidence and social skills. She included everyone in activities, resolved conflicts through communication, and celebrated other children's successes without competition or resentment. These relationship skills were the result of growing up in a family where emotional intelligence was modeled and taught, where boundaries were respected, and where love was unconditional rather than performance-based. David's 8th birthday had been similarly joyful, with friends and activities that reflected his interests and personality, rather than adult agendas or family obligations. Both children were learning that celebrations should enhance relationships and create positive memories, rather than serving as opportunities for manipulation or control. The contrast with my own childhood experiences was profound but not bitter. I felt grateful for the opportunity to provide Emma and David with the kind of secure, loving family environment that I had craved but never experienced. Their childhood was proof that breaking cycles of family dysfunction was possible, and that the next generation could grow up with emotional skills and relationship patterns that would serve them throughout their lives. The Foundation's impact evaluation had documented significant improvements in clients' financial security, relationship satisfaction, and mental health outcomes following participation in our programs. The research validated our approaches and provided evidence for expansion and replication in other communities. But beyond the statistics and program evaluations, the personal stories of transformation and recovery were the most meaningful measures of success. People who had escaped family financial abuse were building independent, fulfilling lives that honored their values while protecting their well-being. Their success stories provided hope and practical guidance for others facing similar challenges. The Foundation had created a community of support and understanding that was crucial for recovery and growth. The work was demanding and, sometimes, emotionally difficult, but it was also deeply meaningful and professionally fulfilling. It allowed me to transform personal trauma into resources for systemic change, while building a career that aligned with my values and experiences. As I reflected on 20 years of transformation and growth, I realized that the most important lesson wasn't about money or family dynamics or professional success. It was about the fundamental importance of valuing yourself enough to demand respect and create boundaries that protect your well-being. The scared, exhausted woman who had finally said no to family exploitation had discovered that she was capable of much more than crisis management and financial servitude. She had built a life characterized by authentic relationships, meaningful work, and genuine happiness. The journey hadn't been easy, but it had been worthwhile. Every difficult decision, every moment of doubt, every challenge faced had contributed to building the strength and wisdom that now characterized my life. Most importantly, the struggle had generated insights and resources that could help other people facing similar challenges. Personal trauma had been transformed into social contribution and individual empowerment. Emma and David were living proof that cycles of family dysfunction could be broken, and that healthy relationship patterns could be established and maintained across generations. They were growing up with emotional intelligence and boundary-setting skills that would protect them throughout their lives. Tom and I had built a marriage based on mutual respect and shared values that continued to deepen and strengthen over time. Our relationship provided a model for Emma and David about what healthy adult partnerships look like. Pacific Financial Solutions had grown into a successful firm that demonstrated the compatibility of ethical practices and business success. The Foundation's work was creating systemic changes that would benefit many people beyond our direct clients. The book, speaking engagements, and professional training were raising awareness about family financial abuse and providing resources for people seeking to escape exploitation. Some people call this selfish. I call it survival. And for the first time in my adult life, I'm not just surviving, I'm thriving.